Hey everyone, welcome to today's session, another Instructors Roundtable here on the Tactical Breakdown podcast. My name is Adam Kinakin. I am the founder and managing director of the ILET Network and host here of the Tactical Breakdown. Honored to be here again and bring another amazing discussion and roundtable to you folks. We're going to be on this thing for a good 3 hours here today, and we're talking all about physical fitness and how that bridges to mental wellness. What are the key components of both of those? And there's going to be a lot of wide-ranging discussion. We have experts on both sides of the field. We have law enforcement and military veterans here on this call as well. And so you're going to get a very dynamic and very diverse experience set with this conversation. And I'm really excited to be able to bring that to you today. And it's really going to be a really good conversation. For those of you who are watching this live, and I've said this in the chat, but please feel free to ask any questions that you have of the panelists here on the live chat. That's what we do this for. It's for you guys to have access to the experts. So if you're here with us live, please feel free to ask any questions that you have in the chat. And some point down the road here during this call, we're going to be doing some giveaways. So we're either going to give away some training or give away some swag. I don't know what we're going to do yet, but we'll figure that out. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So before we get into things and before I introduce the panel, I do want to let everyone know that on Monday, we are going to be opening up the registration and the website for our 2022 ILET Summit. So it's going to be the third annual ILET Summit. Again, just like every other year, the summit itself will be free to attend for anyone in law enforcement, public safety, security, corrections, or military, and they can attend it live during the week of the summit itself. And for those of you who want to get continued access to that training, you're going to have the opportunity to join the brand new ILET Training Network, which of course is going to have all of those training sessions from the conference, plus a lot more, live Q&As, weekly Q&As with experts from the summit and from our amazing partners and strategic partners and trainers that we're associated with here at ILET. And of course, all of the past training that we've done, you're going to have access to that as well. So more details on that coming up soon. But what I want to do is we're going to play a quick promo video for this year's event. All right. So like I said, really excited about some of the keynotes that we're going to be bringing in this year. We're going to change up the way we run the conference a little bit. And we're also going to be releasing very shortly the plan for 2023, which has been widely asked that we bring ILET to you in person. And we're going to be doing that. and really excited to make those announcements in the next couple weeks. So without any further ado, let me bring on our panel. And we can start talking shop about some fitness and some mental health. So, gentlemen, thank you guys so much for taking the time and joining me here.
Thank you very much.
There's an eclectic group. It looks like so. For everybody watching this, we're gonna have a good split between Canadians and Americans today. Obviously, Lon, Doc, Nate, and Vernon are from the States. Myself, Doug. And potentially two other guests that are going to be joining us, Dr. Chuck Samuels and Amy Boudreau, are also both Canadian. So we'll split it 4 and 4. But I'm not going to be talking too much because, as you can tell, the amount of experience on this panel far exceeds anything that I have personally. And so I'm just going to sit back, shut up, and enjoy the conversation for the most part. So as we jump into this, guys, what I'd like to do is give you a quick chance to go around the horn. Give a quick who you are, what you do, and so people know a little bit about you, and then we'll just jump right into the first conversation, which will be interesting. And I'll tell you why I'm going to start with Doc in a second, but I want to talk about Texas DPS and what they just put out. And so let's just go around the horn. Lon, we'll start with you. We'll go around, and then we can kick it off.
Yeah. So my name is Lon Bartel. I'm the director of training for Vertra builds high-tech simulators for military and law enforcement. That's not why I got brought on. I got brought on because prior to my law enforcement background, my background's actually in sports medicine. My undergrad is in exercise and sports science. The concentration was physiology and biochem. My master's degree is in applied exercise physiology with a focus of performance enhancement. And I'm working on a PhD in psychology on specifically performance psychology. So that's I think more the reason why Adam brought me in here than all the great stuff that I get to do at Vertra.
Well, it's definitely not because of your looks.
No.
So. Doug.
Yeah, my name is Doug Pflug. I was a university football player, wrestled in university at the national level, joined the police department in '89, retired in 2017. But in 1995, I started with the Guelph Storm Hockey Club. I'm a professional strength and conditioning coach, and every one of the pro hockey players that went through the Guelph Storm, I was responsible for their off-ice conditioning. So taking a lot of that together, and now I've got a leadership business where I'm an executive leadership coach, having completed my executive leadership through Cornell University.
Awesome. That's exciting, brother. Vernon.
My name is Vernon Griffith. My partner here is Nate Palin. I'm the CEO of the initiative. I have a background in professional athletics, done a lot of work with professional athletes of all different levels, started a program working with military special operations guys. Now we have the initiative to focus on a spectrum of health performance for law enforcement officers, firefighters, and military members.
Awesome. Right on, brother. And your partner in crime here. Nate, go ahead, dude.
Yeah, Nate Palin, 2IC, kind of grew up, I guess, in special operations with the Army Rangers, got into strength and conditioning, was fortunate enough to continue to coach in the special operations setting, and then moved into a role as the program lead at National Strength and Conditioning Association. From there, a brief stint elsewhere that'll remain nameless, and currently here with the initiative.
Right on, man. Well, happy to have you guys. And for everybody watching this, the initiative and ILET just put out to the world that we're teaming up as strategic partners. Love what these guys are doing, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that coming up here. So, and last but not least, Doc, go ahead, brother.
Thanks, Adam. My name is Mike Simpson. I'm a doctor of emergency medicine down here in Texas. I retired from the Army in 2016. I did 32 years figuring out what I wanted to be when I grew up. So 4 years in Ranger Regiment, 11 years in SF with 2 different jobs. Well, actually 3 different jobs on a Special Forces A detachment. Decided I needed to come up with a retirement plan. So I went to medical school, went back to the soft community. I did 6 years and 5 deployments with the Joint Medical Augmentation Unit with JSOC out of Fort Bragg. And then, like I said, retired in 2016. I'm a SWAT doc here, both regionally and with a state organization. I also have my own company called Graybeard Performance. which is all about helping dudes over 40 embrace the lifestyle of the warrior athlete. I wrote a book last year that did pretty well, kind of on that subject. And I do some consulting work on the side.
Doc, we need to work on your retirement, my friend.
Yeah, I can't. Yeah. Well, I can't. It's, it's all about the Benjamins, right? So, it's retirement until, could I just absolutely stop working now? Yeah. But a lot of the things that I like to do, I wouldn't be able to do. So
Listen, guys, I really appreciate all of you taking the time and being on here. And like we discussed, there's going to be a lot of comments that are come in from the Peanut Gallery. And if you have questions, comments for any of these guys, please feel free to add them in the comments and we can address those. But really, this is about having a conversation and talk and shop so people can see a little look behind the curtain. The conversations that we have, I know I get the chance to speak with you guys all very regularly on a personal basis, but this is a chance for all of us to come together and kind of share knowledge and information, which I'm excited about. And so the first thing I wanted to start this off with, and I kind of teased it a bit, Texas DPS just created a new policy, which is very interesting. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to I'll share my screen here so people can see what's going on. I'm just going to share the Chrome tab here with everybody. So if I go onto this into this thing here, and I'm going to bring this up full screen. So I picked this one because it was my favorite headline that I've seen so far. So essentially, the long and short of it is Texas DPS is setting a size regulation for their officers. So I believe if you go down here, so men with a waist size over 40 and women with a waist size over 35 are now required to get down to that or face some type of remedial work, or they up into including potential termination if they don't meet that fitness standard. Now, here is where I find this interesting. They talk about it as a fitness standard. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think a waist size doesn't necessarily correlate with your level of fitness. But I'd be very interested, Doc, to get your opinion on this. Because you're in Texas, but because I think you've probably had a lot of in-depth conversations about this already. So I'm going to leave it to you to kick this off.
Yeah, I have been asked about it in a couple of different formats, and my response is kind of like that pirate GIF to what you said. It's not a gauge of fitness. Yes, but also no. Right? Yeah. It's one of those things. It's not clean cut either way. Are they kind of picking an arbitrary metric? Yeah, they kind of are. And the arguments, of course, that we hear, is waist size is not directly an indicator. True. What if I can still pass my functional fitness chest? Got it. Those are the two big things that we always hear. But I see this, and I'm not. I didn't get consulted on this, and I don't know what my stance would have been if somebody from DPS would have emailed me or called me up and asked me about it. But I can tell you four things that come to mind right away that, if I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt as to why they came up with this policy. So number one is long-term effect. Is, even if you can do the functional fitness test, that's fine, right? But think of an 18-wheeler going uphill with an overloaded cargo compartment. Yeah, I could probably get away with that, but what is the cost? What's happening to the rings on those pistons? What's happening to those plugs? What's happening to the camshaft? What's happening to everything else? The added stress on that vehicle as it's going up these hills on this cross-country trip, right? So one of the things, and Adam, you've heard me preach about before, is longevity, right? And it's one of the big tenets of my book is talking about longevity. So someone who's in their career, maybe in their 30s or their early 40s, and they have a 40-plus inch waist, and they're still out there handling it, I get that. But do I think the department is saying, hey, we're really concerned about what you're going to be like when you're 70? No, they're not. But that is a justification, is not just to think about what you can do now, but the added stress. Think of the added stress that you're putting on your joints not to mention, the cardiovascular system, but the stress on your joints, the disc herniations you're subjecting yourself to, the way your knees are grinding together. Hey, this guy's going to get a hip replacement next month. And I've never been morbidly obese. I've been overweight for my height. And a couple of years ago, I ballooned up to almost 200 pounds, which for somebody who's 5'6" is way too much. And when I was that heavy, I could do a lot of stuff. I was doing strength and conditioning workouts 5 days a week. I went to the C4C combatives instructor course, rolling on the mat with 30-year-old dudes for 8-hour days, all day, 4 days in a row, doing high intensity interval Muay Thai workouts. Thought I was in some of the best shape of my life, and stepped on the scale and was really surprised that I was just a hair under 200 pounds. And that's not sustainable over time, like for all the reasons that I mentioned, right? Just think about what it's doing to your frame. You're just not meant to carry that much around. So that's one thing. Another thing is, aside from being able to do functional fitness, and I don't know what their functional fitness test is, think about getting in and out of a car window, extricating yourself from a burning vehicle, extricating somebody else, the added weight of carrying somebody else with body armor on, having to go in a window or over a fence in pursuit of a suspect. These are all things that obviously that are going to be a little bit more difficult for you with a little bit more room around your midsection. So that's something to think about. And a third thing to think about is you do project an image to the public, right? That's the big thing. That was one of the big reasons we used to always have to take a DA photo in the Army. Was they said, well, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. We don't care how much you can bench press. We don't care how you do on your functional fitness test. Or we do care, but we also care about, do you present a military appearance and a professional and healthful appearance in your uniform? So that's something to think about, and something that's important as well. And the argument is always made whenever you bring up a standard like this. And I took a lot of heat, the years I'm back on Twitter now, but the years I was off was specifically something that I posted that had to do with, that the whole body positive movement was actually enabling unhealthy habits and comorbidities. And I took a lot of heat for that. And ultimately, people tried to dox me, dox my wife, call our employers and everything else. And I had to get off Twitter for a while. And the kind of the straw man argument that's always brought up is, well, what about the unhealthy thin? They're unhealthy too. They might be even more unhealthy. Okay, I get that. But that's not, it's kind of like undiagnosed disease that you can't see, right? If you run up to me, Adam, and you are bleeding from your arm, I recognize that, and I can do something with it. I can put a tourniquet on you. If you walk up to me and you say something's wrong and I don't know what, and you're bleeding internally, and all I have is my own two hands and what I have on my person, I can't diagnose that, so I can't do anything with that. That's a little bit of an oversimplification, but I think that's a little bit of what DPS was looking at. And we know that obesity is a nationwide epidemic, not quite a global epidemic, not quite a pandemic, but it's getting there. It's a nationwide epidemic, and it's a real epidemic among first responders and law enforcement. And we know that long hours, shift work, energy drinks and eating on the go, stress, your cortisol levels are a wreck all the time. And these are all contributing to it. So I think if you held a gun to my head and asked me, am I going to support this or not? If you held a gun to my head, I would say, yes, I would support it. However, DPS needs to enable them. If they're not enabling them, then they're just being assholes. They need to be enabled. They need to be enabling them with nutritionists on the payroll. They need to enable them with a gym they have access to and time to work out. They need to be teaching them about sleep hygiene, diet, supplementation, how much caffeine is the right amount of caffeine, all of these things. And Nate, I don't know what year you got to regiment, but that was, I was in regiment when Reagan was president. So, this was, we were practically jumping off of pterodactyls back then. The Ranger Regiment has come a long way now, and they have a nutritionist, an exercise physiologist, people that are figuring all this out. DPS needs to step up and enable their people with all of those things. And if they're not, then it's bullshit and they're just screwing people.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I think if you took a poll of everybody and you said, would you rather your agency have a policy like that or not? I think the majority would say yes. But I think it's just like anything. They're the one of the first to actually just take the leap and say, we're going to do something about this.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I applaud. I think that's phenomenal. I always, for me, I always question when I'd go to the QM and we had uniforms like size tent, and you're like, why do these even exist? Like, why is this even a thing? Right. Yeah. And so this to me was like, I understand where they're coming from, but Mike, you nailed it on so many points there, brother. I think,
but that being said, I mean, but 40 it's also an arbitrary designation too, right? Now, for me, if I had a 40-inch waist at 5'6", that's obvious to everybody that that's a problem, right? If a guy is 6'6" and has a 40-inch waist, and maybe he's a big dude, maybe he was a collegiate linebacker, played a couple of years pro, and then decided to pursue a career in law enforcement, he's still squatting and deadlifting off the charts and winning national competitions, right? Now, and he might have a 40-inch waist, all right? So his 40-inch waist is not equal to my 40-inch waist. Not all 40-inch waists are created equal. There needs to be some type of exponent system that you do there. And as for all of the flaws that the Army tape test had, it was grounded in a sound principle, which is, hey, what's your waist size compared to your neck size, compared to this, compared to that? So just an arbitrary number, I think they can do better.
Yeah, the guy that Doc just described, I worked with. He was an internationally ranked strong man. He was 6'6". He was a former lineman.
There you go.
And you want to talk about just an amazing physical specimen. And that's the thing. The fact that it's arbitrary. What's the scientific basis for this magic number? Mm-hmm. If you want to talk about ratios, okay, I'm more willing to listen to a ratio, right? So instead of a singular benchmark. And what is that now based on? The fact that we're having, okay, men is 40, women's 35. How do you come up with that? Mm-hmm. So, and I'm going to take it from a little bit different perspective, because I spent a good portion of my time as a law enforcement officer involved in our police association. I was our sergeant at arms and vice president and president. Now you start dealing with contracts, union contracts, and how that can tie into it. Because a lot of times your folks across the nation are signed up with, or, connected up with some type of association. And all right, now we have to deal with, is that a negotiated item that we have to start, looking at? But to make that arbitrary number without a scientific foundation, I think they're going to run into some legal problems.
One thing real quickly, guys, in the comments here, and Brian, I'm going to throw you completely under the bus, brother. So Brian, I believe is actually with Texas DPS. He's a sergeant there, and he said, so one of his comments was that everything falls under their command presence policy, not a physical fitness standard, which is interesting. And the second was everything that Doc mentioned that DPS needs to have in place to enable troopers is actually in place and all there currently.
And Adam mentioned that we actually sat down, Vernon and I, not too long ago at dinner with some of these folks, including their ex-phys lead. And, for as many fronts as we might disagree in some capacities, and I'm definitely on board with pretty much everything you said there, Doc. I think worth mentioning is that they do have, like, essentially what it does is it rings an alarm saying this person needs an intervention, and then they create a mutually agreed upon intervention that they have to adhere to. So the adherence is process oriented instead of outcome oriented, which I'm definitely a fan of that. So as opposed to like, hey, you have to hit this benchmark, it's you have to do this work that again is mutually agreed upon with somebody who is a subject matter expert. So it should work. And if it doesn't, it's on the expert so long as the officer is actually executing it. Mm-hmm. And then Adam, you stole my thunder because I was going to say that it is a command presence policy. And I think that's important because especially if we're talking about something like, even if we're talking about body composition as measured by a number that is, let's say accurate, it's still not a measure of performance. It's an indicator of other health issues. So I love that mention of looking downstream and longevity component. And then it's a performance modifier, right? Depending on what we're doing, our body composition will place a role, but that number is not necessarily a performance marker. And so I just think that's kind of important to show some of the separation that it actually has from the job duty. And to support that, I don't know what their physical fitness test is, but from what it sounds like, 200 of 4,000 officers failed the size requirement. So 200 of them exceeded the 40 or the 35 inches, which is 5% of the force. But then only 0.05% of the force, or in total, failed the fitness test also. So in other words, you've got folks who are failing this quote command presence policy, but passing the fitness test, which kind of even further separates the policy from being what I would call fitness driven, which I'm always scared to be the enforcer of something like this on the fitness side of the house. For that reason, because much to Lon's discussion, you've got somebody who's, crushing it. And certainly somebody 6'6" winning world records has a command presence. And so they're passing the eye test and they're probably crushing the fitness test also, yet potentially failing this somewhat arbitrary, other assessment.
I want that guy as my breacher.
Yeah.
And Doc, I totally agree with you, but I wanted to add a fourth point there. I look at it from an officer safety perspective, that if I'm a fit officer and I go out there, my partner can't keep up. What happens if I go down and they can't defend me, and then I lose my life because they're on the road? In Ontario, we've got 16,000 police officers, and all the police departments have different policies. My department, if you did your fitness test and you got 95%, then you get 2 days off for free, which was fantastic. In our benefits called employee assistance benefits, we've got nutritionists, we've got personal trainers and all that. But unfortunately, like 20% of the organization would use it because people get lazy, and it's almost like everyone wants a trophy generation. And sadly, they don't see the benefit of the longevity of their life, and they're not utilizing those. So it's kind of scary that way.
No, I agree.
Brian came up with it again here. So this is their PT test. 5 tests: standard PRT, push-ups, sit-ups, 1.5 mile, combat fitness test, a 2K row, a 4-minute row, and a 500-meter row. Interesting.
I'd love to know what the combat fitness test is.
Yeah, like if he can give some detail on that, that'd be awesome.
All right, Brian. Well, there you go, brother. Some work for you. If you do that, I'm gonna get Doc. I'm gonna get both Doc and Doug will sign a copy of their books and send it to you. How's that? Doc will deliver.
Lon, I got a question for you. With your being on the association, I talked to our old association, and in Ontario, workplace accommodation is an epidemic. That 20% of our workforce are all on accommodation issues. Is it different in the States that, say you said that you can't go out on the road and then they're going to file a grievance against the organization and the union's going to support it because they would here? What's it like down there?
It really depends where you are across the United States. So we start getting into whether there's collective bargaining or whether you actually have another legal precedent that's set forth as far as the association rules. In our situation, we were a meet and confer. Right. So the goal was more of a collaboration. You may have an organization that's got a lot more political power and clout that they can, force some of those other stuff. I actually implemented and started pushing being able to have a fitness program. And our fitness program was all about being able to be involved in a process, number one. But number two was showing progression. Right. So you didn't have to be perfect. You just had to show that you were making some movement forward. And, one of the things that I think we need to talk about later on, and not right now, Adam, is a lot of the fitness stuff out there. When I started, right, it was Cooper. Everything was Cooper standard, Cooper test, Cooper this, Cooper that. You had a lot of folks who could pass Cooper. They couldn't fight.
Yeah.
They can run, right? They can do push-ups, they can do sit-ups. They couldn't, they would gas, quickly because they had no anaerobic power and the ability to actually stay in a fight. So again, are we talking command presence and how they look? Well, we can do all kinds of stuff. I guess you could throw a waist trainer on somebody if you really want to worry about how they're just appearing. And are they functional? And functional is more than me being able to run, a 6-minute mile pace.
Yeah, I'm going to weigh in quick because I've definitely got very strong feelings on the testing front, more because I've been speaking a lot recently on the Army combat fitness test. But what I will say is what we have to remember with fitness tests versus job tests, just like he did lay out the combat fitness test here, is that is at least twice removed from the job itself. And so these underlying qualities can give us an indicator of a lot of things. But to make those pass fail because they are so far removed from the job itself is always a slippery slope and pretty darn difficult to defend. And I'll be honest, like even just glancing at this fitness test, like you're gonna have a really hard time trying to relay that specifically to job demands.
Yeah, job task analysis becomes a critical component on any type of standard. And you know, again, let's talk from a legal perspective. You start getting a legal challenge on it. What's the job task analysis? How does that play into it? Well, now we've got money tied up and lawyers fighting stuff in court. It could potentially be just a really, really difficult path as opposed to working with folks to try to come up with a plan and get the buy-in. Go, hey, look, I'm not doing this just because I want you to collect your retirement. I mean, so let's talk about those perspectives on, all right, what can I do to get you motivated? What can I do to get you motivated? How about this? How about I give you 30 minutes every shift to get some training time in? I'll buy 30 minutes, you buy 30 minutes. How's that? Something. And you know, like, again, this is a topic we can get into later, how that ties into performance when you're working. Clearer mind, better emotional control, all those other aspects that I think that by hour 2 or something we could probably discuss.
Well, worth reinforcing that is when we were at the IACP a few weeks ago, the officer safety wellness piece of it anyway, one thing that was constantly reiterated on the mental health front was the programs that were successful were sincerely officer oriented. And so they truly were there, not in a punitive fashion, not as a downstream repercussion, but as in a true investment in the force. And part of that was that involvement, that collaboration piece, Lon, that you just talked to, being so vital in those being programs that are truly, truly owned and believed to be for the good of the officer.
You know, as I read the combat fitness test that they're doing, a lot of those movements, I'm like, oh, those are fun movements. Those are great functional movements. We can argue sumo deadlift because that's like the beautiful argument that everybody wants to have right now. You know, sumo or conventional. But he's right. How do I tie that directly into a task where a law enforcement officer is going to perform? I mean, that's the biggest challenge that we run into. You want to talk about a functional task? How about we create a situation where we have an elevated center of gravity because of body weight with our vest, body weight with the gear, everything else. And now we start having to deal with, you know, agility tests, balance tests, things that actually tie into performance in a real job task that make a huge impact. You don't see, it's kind of silly, but you don't see balance and agility training. Those are key roles to prevent injury, and we don't see it.
Yeah, I think worth mentioning on the testing front is like you're either testing the job or you're not. And when you're not, you need to test underlying physical qualities that allow you to target training in a specific way. So again, if I look at this fitness test, if somebody sucks at it, I don't really know why, because there's too much going on. Versus you have something where, okay, we're looking at aerobic capacity on its own, and we're looking at strength on its own, power on its own. So there's less of these confounding variables that make it very hard to decipher which underlying physical quality is the reason behind some job specific shortcoming. And so when you want to make it like the job, then just make it pretty much the job. And I don't know if, you know, who's been on here prior, but there's definitely a few folks that are pretty heavily invested in either I won't say creating legally defensible tests, but creating relevant tests that give departments a better, snapshot of whether people are actually able to do the job or not. And quite honestly, like those tests, they don't look like exercise. They look like law enforcement, or at least they look like the physical portion of law enforcement, I should say.
Lon, that kind of ties into those conversations we were having at ILETA, where we talked about making sure, how do we know that learning has occurred, right? We talk about that with officers. How do we know that if we're going to put them through training, it doesn't matter what type of training it is, how do we know that learning was occurred and they can actually use it when they need it? That same thing is exactly what Nate, what you were just saying, is how do we take that same concept now on the physical side of things and say, how is it that what the skills that we're giving them on the physical side of things actually can be transferred into operational success? I think it's interesting because those conversations are happening more and more and more, right? This conversation is a great example of that. But I think that if you look across the board, I mean, you talk to any agency, when I brought this topic up with a bunch of people, they're like, we're sitting down right now, we're talking about this at our agency. And I think it's very front of mind for a lot of law enforcement, not just in North America, but internationally as well.
Yeah, I mean, the key term really you're talking about is, then everybody on the panel is going to understand this, is specificity. I mean, ultimately, that's really what we're talking about, is the specific movement, physical demand, strength demand, energy demand, whatever it is in that conditioning program, in that testing program, is that relatable? How relatable is it to the actual job task, job skill? The specific aspects of this component, this training, this testing has to be pretty tightly related to this for it really to be valid. And we've all understood that from a sports perspective for a long time. It's not new. It's not, brand new information, but you're not seeing it translate over into law enforcement. And Adam, you and I have had that conversation when it came to how you teach psychomotor skills. I mean, we knew how. Take the conditioning aspect, right? Talk about the motor learning development aspect. You've heard me preach more times than I can count on how we know how to train athletes to learn the skills, and law enforcement is at least 40 years behind when it comes to how to train those tasks. This is no different.
Well, and unfortunately, Lon, the military is as far behind, if not farther behind. And we all thought they were going to remedy that, right, with the ACFT. The APFT, the Army Physical Fitness Test, has been shit since its inception. We all knew that. It was a measure of nothing, absolutely nothing. That's why all of the special mission units had their own version of some type of functional test that was kind of tailored to what that unit emphasized. And that was true. That, to my knowledge, is true of all of them. The NFL has the combine, and they can tell you, if you ever sit down and research it, they can tell you what everything in the combine is designed to evaluate, right? What it's a yardstick of. Now, somebody might in the comments, or somebody on the panel might tell me I'm full of shit because I got this from a reliable source. My understanding of how the Army Combat Fitness Test came to be was a survey of multiple individuals on what physically demanding task did you do in combat. I was climbing a wall. I was sprinting behind cover. I was carrying somebody. I was carrying a litter. I was throwing a grappling hook up into a window. I was throwing grenades. I was lobbing mortar rounds. I was carrying my kit. All of these things went into a computer, and the computer generated a kinesthetic model, a model based on cardiovascular fitness, lactic fitness, if I'm using that term correctly, basically anything having to do with the physiology of how you're going to do those movements. It constructed models. That algorithm was then fed into a completely separate algorithm, into a completely separate computer that said, okay, now we know the what, tell us what exercises translate into that. And that was what that computer spit out, which was the ACFT. Of course, when it got unveiled, it was, no, this was the patriarchy in a secret room with hoods on and candles burning, coming up with a way to get females out of combat arms, which we know is complete BS. And that's not what happened. So in theory, anyway, this was the best test of fitness for a wartime soldier. And the fact that it was tiered according to what type of job you do and was gender non-specific and age non-specific, that all played into it. And when the ACFT was first announced, or not first announced, it was, I think it was being trialed at the time. And I had been retired a couple of years at that point. So this was like 2018, 2019. I took all those events. I took them to my coach and I said, hey, next Monday, I want to do all of these. And I did. At 50 some odd years old, I did all of those events and I got a 501 on the ACFT. So it was not an impossible test. And I remember I didn't even read what the standards are, and everybody made a big deal out of leg tucks being a big deal. And I only did 12 leg tucks on the test. And I was like, wow, those are really hard. And I was like, I wonder what the minimum I have to do to pass is. I was thinking it was probably 20. I didn't know that it was 1. So we need something like that. We needed something like that in the military. They had their chance. They failed, at least in the big military. But I agree with you. I think law enforcement needs it as well. We need to feed all of that data into a computer. We need to come up with the kinesthetic models of what those skills represent, and then solid metrics on how to measure them.
Yeah, Doug, you mentioned there in our chat about the prep tests for recruits in Ontario. I think if you go to, so RCMP use the PAIR, then there's like the POPAT, and these are all standing for essentially somewhere in there. It's police physical abilities, preparations, examination, or testing to see where your physical limit is at. Usually it's a combination of figure eights, stairs, jumps, and then some type of push pull and some type of body drag or beanbag carry. Like there's, I think that's usually what they look like, right?
Yeah, and then at the end of it, they have to carry like 150-pound weight to set distance, and they have to actually jump through a window like they're going through a window of a house and stuff. But the sad thing is, right now, it seems with recruiting here, they're so focused on an undergraduate degree, they're going towards those folks more. But you don't even have to pass now the prep test to go to the college. They want you to pass it by the time you've graduated. And I'm thinking, if you want to be a police officer, you have to learn and you have to go through those processes to get the job. And if we're cutting the fitness down right now, and if they're not fit at 21 or 22, yet they work their butts off for 13 weeks, they get in shape, who's to say that that's going to be a lifestyle change for something that lasts into their 40s or 50s like I'm at? And I'm really scared with that because with the whole workplace accommodation and everything, the focus is on degree. You see a real disparity between those ex-athletes that come in there that do fantastic with the physical side of it. They've got education, the resiliency associated with, but I've seen a lot of people that have degrees, but they're not in shape. And I'm really scared for them when they go on the street because they're going to get hurt.
Well, and again, my academy time was a long time ago. And we focused POPAT and most of it was Cooper. We did a lot of running, and everybody joked towards the ends of the academy that when it was all said and done, they were going to join the NRA, never run again. Yeah. So, I mean, you created an environment where people literally hated the activity and they hated the movement and they hated what they were doing and started to get such an aversion. I'm like, well, that just doesn't seem like the right thing to do if you want to sustain it for a lifetime. And my background is a little different. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I taught aerobics and a bunch of other stuff prior to even going in. And I knew that group fitness was such an important component because adherence to the group, dedication to the group helps carry things through. It keeps motivation. People stay part of it. All the things that we know to help keep people involved. But the academies and some of these things that created those environments, they didn't want to do it anymore. And what I saw, folks literally a year after we got done in the academy, they blew up.
Exactly.
Lon,
when I went through, there was a 1.5 mile run the first week, and that went up to 5 miles. I was a tailback in university, so my cardio was doing 40 meter sprints or something along those lines. To sit there and say, Doug, you're 240, 6'1", you're going to run 5 miles. There was just no value there for me. My fitness came from the anaerobic or the training pass to failure. So it's almost like the 1.5 miles is just something that's easy. You set it up, you run 6 laps around the track, and you're done. So I really hope to see that moving forward. They do the functional stuff. Like, where in your job are you going to have a street chase that's 5 miles long?
I just want to jump back to Lon, the point that you made there, and it kind of just light bulb went off. You'd said something, when we train in a group, right? If we go and it's morning PT and we're doing a run and you have the whole platoon with you, you don't want to be the person that falls out. So you do whatever you need to do to make it through that run, right? When you go to do that by yourself, there's nothing stopping you from quitting, right? And I think outside, except for internal motivation. And I think we do a really horrible job at establishing that when we in academy, when that should be developed, where you take those individual officers and you develop those traits within them so that they can train on their own and they feel comfortable training on their own and they actually enjoy it in some way, shape, or form, but they feel that they can accomplish things without needing to be part of a group. The group stuff is great. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love that kind of stuff, but I think and for me, that's, I don't run. Like I joke about this all the time. This day that I signed my release papers from the forces, I haven't run more than 20 feet. Like, I just haven't. I'll do everything that I can outside of running. I just don't enjoy running. I'm a very heavy, dense person, and I don't run well. So, and I have a back injury, so I'll just use that excuse. But
hold on a second. When I say group, though, remember, I'm not necessarily talking a group of 20, 30 people. A group can be a gym partner. Yeah. 2 or 3 guys that you are now committed to, and you motivate each other and you hold each other accountable. When I was working as a strength coach and a trainer before even the whole cop thing, I had guys that I knew through Phoenix PD and the Phoenix SWAT team, and I helped them with rehab and a bunch of other stuff. There were 3 specific guys that I remember. JP Morgan was probably the most, and I got a lot of love for him. He got me into cop work. But they had a group of 3 guys that were dedicated. They always showed up. Charlie was there. They were, was dedicated, but they had an interesting thing. There was a Superman shirt that one of them always had. And what the deal was is if you missed a workout, you had to wear the Superman shirt till the next guy missed the workout. So there was a motivational component. I'm not talking you have to have 30 people. 2 to 3 people that hold you accountable is a phenomenal way to get that motivation and keep going.
I think we're talking about when they initially come into the academy or that setting or some sort. I relate it back to sports. They're not into fitness. They're not into exercise. So you have to empower the importance of it, the longevity of it, the health, the readiness, all those key factors that you think is important. But I was running into this as a coach initially in sports because I was like, these guys don't want to work out. And then a mentor of mine was like, why would they? They don't give a shit about working out. They care about catching footballs and making money. And I was like, okay, so it's on me as the coach, as the leader of the troop, whatever it is, to relay the importance of why we are training. So like you just said, like we need to have someone to rely on. It still doesn't matter if they don't understand why they're doing it, the importance behind it, because to be honest, they might not like working out at all. But if they understand the importance and the why behind it, they may be more implied to continue on with it on their own.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think if you combine those 2 things, those 2 points from Lon and Vernon, you've got kind of a really, really strong position, which is, a level of accountability, but not a punitive, hold your feet to the fire level, more of a camaraderie type of accountability. And then also an underlying why that's, driving your behaviors that are going to lead to your commitment to training.
I'm interested in getting your guys' take on this and Doc or Doug. Instilling these traits within officers at the beginning of their career is crucial in making sure they make it to the end of their career, right? And I know, Doc, you talk about this all the time, and Doug, you do too, which is, for those guys that are getting on, right, that are 15, 20, 25 years in, it's a completely different battle that these folks are waging with their bodies, right? It's a completely different ball game. So can you just touch on maybe just why it's so important from the beginning to have these? And because if you try to start picking up from zero when you're 15 years in, it's going to be a rough road.
Doug, do you mind if I go first? Because I'm actually going to have to jump off real quick.
Yeah,
although I'm definitely going to have to watch the recording of this later because I'm interested in your take on this. So one thing you mentioned it, Adam, I talk about it all the time. I wish I would have known as an 19-year-old Ranger what I know now, what I was doing to my body. And back then it was a badge of honor to go out drinking all night and run 5 miles and vomit as many times as possible and treat your digestive system like an absolute landfill, and just eat whatever you wanted. And knowing what I know now about what I was doing to my body, not getting the proper macros, not getting, health, and the Army chow hall back then was, I'm not using that as an excuse, but it was absolutely horrific. And I wasn't using the proper fuel. I wasn't getting the proper rest. We as an institution didn't know what we were doing. So, you gotta make those guys understand, hey, yeah, you can do it now. I get that you can live off of 3 hours sleep, an energy drink, and a dip in your mouth. I get that. I get that you can still outrun everybody else. I get that. All right. There's damage that's being done that you can't see, that you're not going to pay for until much, much, much later. So how long do you want to be in the job? Do you want to be able to run and play catch with your kids and enjoy the quality of life? You're going to bust your ass at this job for 20, 30 years, but you're not dead after that. You're still going to want to enjoy what comes after. So you need to start establishing those patterns now, those patterns of a healthy life, and the dividends that you're going to reap later. It's just like, what is it? The rule of 75 or whatever. I'm terrible with money. Somebody probably knows what this is. If you put in so much money every month now, it's equal to putting in like 4 or 5 times as much 10 years from now. It's the same with your body. Every little thing that you do now, getting enough water, not abusing your body with substances and avoiding things like nicotine and too much caffeine, you're going to reap benefits from this later on. And I'll tell you, almost everything that's bad for you, whether it's too much cholesterol, too much of a certain macro, too much caffeine, too much nicotine, too much alcohol, just tell guys that, hey, keep that up and your dick's not going to work. That's the ultimate motivator for everybody. And it's actually true. So, that's how I scare the hell out of guys who get diagnosed as type 2 diabetics in their 30s. And they're like, well, I don't feel that. I don't care. Who cares about my hemoglobin A1C? Who cares about my kidney function? First thing that's going to happen is your dick's going to stop working. Now I have their attention. So that's how we get their attention. Sorry to be so vulgar, but that's all I got, guys. I got to take off because I got to take my dogs for a walk. My wife's out with her sister. She's going to be back soon. I got to take the dogs for a walk before they get back. But
appreciate it, brother.
All right, man. Thanks, everybody. I'm looking forward to watching this later and hearing what everybody else's input was.
Thanks, man.
Thank you, Doc. Great meeting you.
All right, great meeting you guys. Take care.
Take care.
So
I mean, Doc's right, but it kind of goes bigger than you got to find their motivation. Because what motivates you and what you think is important may be completely different from what they think is important. To find that hook is a critical component. And maybe that, hey, look, do you want to be able to hang out with your kids and watch them play, or you want somebody else taking care of them?
Real quickly, guys, Lon, sorry to cut you off, but this just happens to be phenomenal timing. We're just going to replace doctors real quick. And I'm going to bring on Dr. Chuck Samuels.
Hi, guys.
From Center for Sleep up here in Calgary. And Chuck, thanks for joining us, brother. Appreciate it.
No problem. I'm a bit casual.
Hey, I wore my flamingo shirt today.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're good. Okay. Sorry, Lon, you can go. You can continue on with your thought there.
Hi, Lon.
Well, and what I was saying is just being able to tap into what motivates them intrinsically. Extrinsic motivation doesn't last very long. We most of us have seen it firsthand. You can offer up cash bonus and discounts and all that other stuff. It typically doesn't last very long. It's not a great motivator. The internal motivators tend to have a longer lasting effect. And I think that sometimes we lose we've lost one major motivator that a lot of our folks don't understand. And it kind of bleeds into this topic. We talk about physical fitness and your body and your joints and blah, blah, blah. But the other aspect, which is part of this discussion, is how it affects your mind and your mental health. cops are going to see things in the first year of their assignments that most people aren't going to see in all of their entire life. And we have a culture where we're going to be very stoic. I'm going to compartmentalize. I'm going to shove that down. I'm going to move forward and everything's golden. And what we're seeing is it's not. But we're not addressing the fact, hey, look, let's talk about your mental health, your emotional, behavioral, mental health, and how fitness and exercise can tie into and help empower and strengthen that. That's another motivator that I think that we do need to start talking about.
And Lon, I totally agree with you. I had a mental health crash in 2007 when I was handed a dead to a little girl. I was a road sergeant, a bunch of us. She died in all of our arms that day. And in the pit of darkness, the only thing that saved my life from not eating my gun was my fitness and the fact that I could go to the gym and blow off the steam. You know, we're fortunate because a lot of the professional athletes that we've dealt with, that's the rare part of segment of society. And I'm dealing with over 6,000 recruits right now. And a lot of them don't know about resiliency. They don't know about working hard, and just generationally, everything in the world nowadays is so instant. You know, Amazon, you can get it delivered in the afternoon, but getting in shape and, you know, getting to that level takes time. And unfortunately, our world is so fast. I totally agree with what the doc was saying. We need to be like Simon Sinek when he talks about understanding the why. Once we understand someone's individual why, we know how and what to do, but that's on a 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 basis. And hopefully the middle managers, the sergeants at our police departments are being taught this stuff to sit down with some of these younger folks, show them the value of the fitness and let them know what they're setting up and put that template on them. So if they do go into the pit of darkness in a crisis call, they've got that whole system and infrastructure in place. I know up here they teach all of our new officers the Road to Mental Readiness training, which is based. It's an anti-PTSD training from the Canadian military. So they're setting that groundwork now, which is fantastic. When I started in '89, it was that whole misogynistic "real men don't cry, suck it up" princess. So that when we did go through those things, you ran from yourself, you ignored who you were, and eventually you can't run from yourself because yourself's going to catch up and it's going to take you down pretty hard. But like we're talking about, that mental health piece, fitness, you know, makes you feel better, but it helps you get out of those type places, because you can see that if you put your reps in, generally you're going to be better off for trying than not.
Well, it becomes and I'll speak to it as an energy source, right? I mean, something that some people can relate to when you're handed your first dead baby or your 10th dead baby, it creates a stir in you, and having some type of outlet that you can direct it in a positive way is, I think, a critical component to it. Yeah. I don't care what that outlet is. If you want to run, and don't get me wrong, I joke about running, but if that's what good, go run. If you want to do some HIIT training on a heavy bag and run intervals on a heavy bag, go do that. If you want to, get under 400 pounds on a squat bar, go do that. You got to find something. And for me personally, throughout my life, whether it was the professional or even the personal struggles, being able to have that outlet was critical to my success and my survival. To this day, I mean, it's nothing better than, going into a garage, getting some gloves on and just letting loose. And when you're done, you're tired, you're exhausted, you feel productive, and it's helped you cope.
And I agree. And, I'm 56 this year. And once you've done the workout, when you're in those critical situations, you have no control, because the world happens around you. You try your best, but sometimes people die, but you have no control. But when you go back to the gym, you have control on how much effort you put into it. And at the end, it's like Vince Lombardi said a long time ago, that there's nothing more glorious than seeing a man lying on the field of battle, exhausted but victorious. But you get to blow out that negative steam. And even though I'm not on the road anymore, I'm in the instructional side, I'm still working out 3 to 5 times a week, because it just helps you feel good. And once those endorphins go, whether you're 18 or you're 56, it still feels pretty damn good.
Hey, Adam, one of the comments that came in was somebody was talking about injuries, and most of us have got it. I mean, I got my own, I got metal, I got, I had one hip higher than the other for about 6 months. I mean, we all have something that or it's multiple. But there's a phrase that I've heard a long time ago, and it's something that stays within the industry, is motion is lotion, right? The moment you stop moving, I get it, it hurts, but you got to move. If you're not moving, you're stagnant. And I don't care what the biological system is. It doesn't really matter. A stagnant biological system is dying. That's the way it works. Motion is lotion. I got it. You're hurt. Find what you can do. Find something. I can only move my hand this far. Then move your hand that far. Do what you can and try to get the treatment that you need. But you got to stay moving. Otherwise, the alternative is not so good.
Speaking of the questions, another one was about finding what motivates each individual to encourage them to remain physically fit. And it's funny, I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were like, if you want to make a killing, go into research within behavioral psychology, because there's still a lot of nobody really knows for a lot of those different things. And obviously, it's one of those. When I was in school anyway, the undergrad joke was like, oh, you don't know what to do. And so you took psychology. And then the rest of us that go all these other paths, we end up thinking like, maybe we should do a PhD in psychology, because we realize that everything actually relates back to that. And so that's definitely something Vernon and I have done a lot of exploring in with regard to like a certification that we recently created, and just trying to understand, some of the different behavioral change theories that are out there, motivational interviewing, et cetera. The one thing I will say that's absolutely paramount is that you have to find a way to engage each individual person and solicit input from them regarding what is going to motivate them. And you just have to meet them where they're at. If you have an ideal solution that is the smoking gun solution and sure to work, but they're not going to be able to implement it regularly with at least a certainty of 90+%, then you've got an absolutely useless solution. You've got the perfect plan that's never actually going to be implemented. And so you need to figure out how to drill down to the officer level, engage as personally as possible, and have a collaborative conversation where you're doing more pulling than you are pushing to try to figure out what can truly motivate them and to what level. Instead of thinking like, what's going to motivate you to lose 40 pounds? Like, what's going to motivate you to walk every day for 10 minutes? And let's start there. Or can you start there? And maybe the answer is, I can't, but I could do 5. Okay, let's start with 5. And then we add from there. So again, I think the biggest component of that, to talk in a realistic way, is personal engagement, whether you're achieving that through peer level trainers, whether you're achieving that through strength and conditioning coaches, leadership, whatever it is that allows you to scale it, where you can literally engage each person independently, as opposed to try to lay down a blanket solution across the force.
Yeah, and I'm going to kind of dovetail on something Nate just said. Can't do 10 minutes, do 5. When I started working with clients back in the day, what I was always pushing was, look, you boil a frog 1 degree at a time. I don't need you coming in here and running 20 miles, 30 miles. I don't need that. I need you to come in, and I need you to, you throw a frog in a pot of boiling water, it's jumping out. It doesn't like the change. There's all kinds of issues. We come in little by little. We set the new norm, 1 degree. So your new norm is every week, 3 days a week, you show up to the gym, even if all you're doing is 10 minutes. And then we add to it. And then we add to it. And then we add to it. Now we're going to modify your diet. We're going to start small increments. What we're going to do is we're going to eliminate the sugary soft drinks that you're down on a routine basis. We're going to start off with no more than 1 can of soda a day. And then throughout the week, we're going to say, okay, no more than 3 cans of soda throughout the entire week. And now we're going to, you find those little increments, and eventually you're where you need to be. What I always saw is people that try to make these huge, grandiose changes, they fail routinely. Yeah. Versus coming in and I'm going to start changing my process 1 degree at a time. Eventually they would get there.
Yeah. One of my favorite sayings, and I don't know where I stole it from, but I absolutely stole it, is slow progress is sustainable progress. Yeah. I think that sustainability is so important. And even back to doc number 1's, sorry, you came in second. So Dr. Samuels, I guess you're automatically doc 2, but doc 1 was talking about, financial investment and same kind of concept. It's like putting that little bit away. You never think twice about it, but your ROI is huge because you're able to sustain it over time.
And Nate, I agree with the financial investment. Organizations have to start investing on the front end for the fitness, the personal trainers, and every that, because if they don't, what are they going to end up paying when the officers are off on accommodation or off on disability? You've got to invest on the front end so that you provide the infrastructure for our people to succeed physically, mentally, and spiritually. Because if you don't, in Ontario right now, they're actually doing their annual budgets knowing that 20% of the workforce is on an accommodated through mental, physical, or spiritual wellness problems. So the organizations have to start to realize they need to invest now to save money down the road.
You know, I want to kind of segue this to something because it just queued up in my head. You guys are talking about the compound interest, right, of being active. And it just because it popped into my head, and because Dr. Samuels is on the call now, him and I had we've had a lot of conversations about this on the other side of things, is how negative decisions that you can make also compound and impact, and specifically with sleep and fatigue management, which plays into your ability to work out and to stay fit and healthy. And to, Lon had brought up talking about, caffeine and stimulants and pop and all of this stuff. And Chuck, you and I were talking about that, how it's, officers don't realize how much of a detriment taking that shot of pre-workout 2 hours to finish the last 2 hours of your shift, how much that not only impacts you that night, but for the rest of that shift, for the rest of that block, for the rest of that month, potentially, if you don't kind of get things in check. So can I hate to just throw it at you and pass it off to you, but I'd love for you to speak on that a little bit.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I think that the focus of the talk is the value of physical activity in the health of law enforcement officers, keeping in mind that there are many other things that are necessary as well. Just so I'm clear, the other doctor, what kind of doctor was he?
Oh, Mike. So he was a former SF 18 Delta, and now he's a emergency trauma physician in Texas.
Okay. Yeah. And so, I think there, it's quite broad, what, law enforcement officers are faced with in terms of health issues in the life cycle of being a law enforcement officer. So, and you all, address the issue of the culture, and it fascinates me because it's been almost 30 years that I've been working with law enforcement officers now. And, it's shocking how little has changed, except that younger recruits are not like the older guys. So the culture of using alcohol to calm down after shift and using caffeine, which is simplifying things, has changed just because the people being recruited are younger. And generally, now again, in the States, it's a lot different than in Canada because there's 18,000 law enforcement agencies in the United States. So, and they're all very different. Ours tend to be a lot more sort of cohesive, but we're a much smaller country. So I think, and all of you have addressed the issue of addressing individual officers and trying to motivate them and whatnot, but you need programs within an agency that guide the agency and help them. So I'm just interested at how many law enforcement agencies, well, I mean, again, the Americans can address this, is having a fitness and lifestyle division within an agency common or uncommon?
It's going to really have a lot to do with the size of the agency. You can have a city, and a city could have a wellness program, but think about what that means, though.
For the city employee, not for the law enforcement officer.
Right. So not only police, but fire and water and parks and...
That's not what I'm... So, I mean, here in Calgary and with the RCMP, they have fitness and lifestyle division that serves the officers, whether the officers use it or not. The other thing that we have, and Doug, I don't know where you're from, but here, fortunately, we have psychological services for the department, and they serve a very important purpose. and it's all confidential. It's insanely confidential. So I think these things are, there's an agency level, and then there's an individual level, and then what can you deploy out there? But there's no question that if you leave a human being to their own devices and you put them in shift work, I don't care what they do, they're going to fuck it up. Excuse my language. And it's not their fault, but then you have someone in the front line or law enforcement, or you have healthcare workers. So, they're just trying to survive. Some actually come up with really good adaptive strategies on their own, but that's not the norm. And so saying to someone, caffeine isn't good for you, or, the energy drinks aren't good for you, that doesn't work, because they got to stay awake. They got to drive home at the end of a night shift and those kinds of things. So we've talked about it, Adam, but I understand the implications of why, and I know you guys do too, it's complete survival. And so the point of physical activity is, one, keep in mind, you're asking them to do another thing in the midst of all the things they have to do. And they're friggin' shift workers. They have no time. None. And so by the time they're 40, and we know this from research, it's a big struggle. So if they come in at 20, they do pretty well for about 4 to 10 years. And then at 40 is the cutoff. 40 to 45, the window is when most officers will say, oh yeah, it became a lot more difficult. One, I had children, and two, I'm getting older. And they have 20 more years to go. 10 more years, 15. So I didn't answer Adam's question, but.
Doc, I got a question for you. When I was I'm from Guelph, Ontario, that's where I worked. We would go 7 night shifts in a row, 11:30 at night till 7:30 in the morning. You had 5 days off. It took you 3 days to come off that. Then you'd go to 5 at night till 3 in the morning. They've now gone to 12-hour shifts. What do you think is the best shift schedule?
First question everybody asks for 30 goddamn years is exactly what you've asked, Doug, and I will not answer it. It's the wrong question. And I'm sure you're a lovely guy, and you served the country, but it drives. I'm ready to retire now. I'm so tired of this. It's the wrong question. There is no good shift. Okay. Zero. None. Okay.
Well, Doc, I'm going to pose a different question. Based on the fact there is no good one, what can we do to try to mitigate the negative aspects?
Just about to
Okay, there you go.
So, Lon, I already gave you the program that was created. I don't know if you looked at it. This is now 6 months ago. What we implement in agencies is fatigue management strategies. Okay. These are well-established, research-based, evidence-based programs. I've just been given a $100,000 grant by the College of Physicians and Surgeons to take that program that we developed for the RCMP and translate it into physicians. We have a big problem with healthcare. We're losing doctors left, right, and center post-pandemic. So the thing is, there are absolute strategies to implement, and they can be implemented at the highest levels within the agency and trickle down to the street. And this is my work for 20 years now, is doing that. And so it's not about the shift. This was always our discussion over the years with senior management. We can give you best practices around shifting, but that depends on what the officer's doing. Is it a duty inspector? Is it a senior person? Is it a patrol officer? General duty member in the RCMP. And when we see what they're doing, is it the district sergeant who may not be in the street as much, but managing officers? And each one of those people, depending on the work that they're doing, has different stressors. Duty inspectors have to manage people in critical incidents. They're sitting at command. The officers out in the street is it forensics? They go off for 48 hours straight and drive to southern Alberta 30 hours and are awake for 30 hours. And, it's just it can be different. So there are limits. I mean, we don't believe that longer than 12-hour shifts are even remotely reasonable. And this thing, Doug, that you did was insane. When I started working with Toronto, they were doing 6 straight 12-hour shifts. That's nuts. Your officers aren't, first of all, they're not awake on the last day of their shift, and they're all sleeping in their cruiser, and they'll tell you that, and it's complete survival. So a lot of strategy can go into helping agencies do this, the ones that are committed. And Calgary was very committed in those days. More recent, it's not the same. Oh, you're on mute, Doug. Sorry.
I'll try one more question. I've talked to a lot of, I'm 55, talked to a lot of colleagues, and there's several doctors in Ontario now that part of their strategies are talking about testosterone supplementation when you're 45, 50 to get you down to the 30-year levels, just to kind of help prevent the burnout and some of the associated things with getting older and getting tired and fatigue. What's your thought process on that?
Sorry, you said testosterone?
Yeah, they're taking testosterone therapy when they're 55. They're looking at their levels are that of a 9-year-old boy, and they're getting them stabilized to about a 30 to 40-year-old male. What's your thought process there?
Well, so this is really important because, first and foremost, these are shift workers. We already know that they're depleting their testosterone abnormally as a shift worker. The physiology, the medicine of what shift work does is very well known and understood, but not by most doctors. So they'll look at values, testosterone, thyroid, which is actually affected by shift worker. So you need to understand that it depends on the timing of when the draw has been done. It's not stable. So just taking a draw doesn't mean that their bioavailable testosterone is necessarily low or abnormal. You can give any man testosterone, and you better tell the wife, because there's downsides to supplementing testosterone, big downsides. So the supplementation of testosterone should be done in the context of, one, the individual's health, and two, what is their circumstance? Shift work? Fine. You know what? What is the single most important thing that increases testosterone?
Rest.
No. What we're actually talking about, physical activity. And what form of physical activity increases testosterone? Resistance training.
Yeah.
And who needs to do resistance training? What age group? 55 and older.
Yeah.
It's more important than cardiovascular training. Way more important. And the health benefits are tremendous. So, my feeling, certainly in law enforcement, is that we don't really think about the life cycle of an officer, and that we don't have that psychology yet. I'll be retired by the time, I think, Nate, you probably do this work, eh? Is that the work you do?
Well, what work specifically? I'm not a law enforcement officer.
No, but you're a psychologist, or?
I'm not. We are exercise professionals.
So
yeah.
So you know this, right? And so, I mean, this is part of what you do. It's looking at the life cycle of an individual and strategizing the training over life cycle. So, just as an example, I'm 65 years old. I started running at 57 with a really good coach, and I can now run at 65 for 3 hours, no problem. And, people shouldn't be able to do that kind of thing at 65. But if you're trained well, you can. And if you're an officer and you need to be fit, because officers need to be fit, when you guys talk about movement, Lon's point, I had probably the best professor in medicine I ever had at the University of Alberta. That's exactly what the title of his textbook was. Movement is life. And it's important. And so, but we don't, the members don't know that. The young guys don't know that these are critical factors. And so the most important thing is physical activity, even with esport professionals. So I worked for Red Bull Gaming for 2 years, And the most important thing for these high-level video gaming athletes making $500,000 a year at 20 was the trainer.
Wow.
And all they do is sit. But that improves cognitive function. Training improves cognitive function. So these things are important. An officer's lives are sitting in a car for hours and then boom, active. That's very difficult to train for. Very difficult. You're going to kick me off now, Adam. I'm talking too much.
No, absolutely not. No, this is fascinating. You did so to Doug's thing. So I'm just going to bring this up and disclaimer, because this is going out on YouTube. Please consult your doctor for if you hear anything medical on this channel. Please consult your own doctor. But I actually, and I've had this conversation with a few guys on here already. I started TRT in December. After
TRT?
Testosterone replacement.
Oh, okay.
Because I'd gone through the hoops and jumped and did all the testing and like spaced apart different times a day, to make sure, like you had said, Dr. Samuels, that it wasn't just a variation because of something. And I started it, and the immediate shift mentally and physically was phenomenal. Like I went from since December, I've lost 30 pounds. My cognitive, like my ability to maintain sharp, cognitively, especially in long days, is doubled. But part of that is due to obviously getting back into the gym and actually lifting again and being, and it all compounds on itself, right? Like exactly what you guys were talking about earlier. The more you do, the easier it is and the better it works. So the TRT thing, Doug, to your point, I mean, I'm not 50 yet. I'm actually quite young to be on TRT, but that's where my levels were at. And I felt something was wrong. Like in my, like, I was so lethargic all the time. I had no motivation for anything. And this went on for like years. And I was like, something's not right. And then eventually I stumbled upon this, got tested, and I was like, shit. So
but I just want to make a point though, Adam, you're trending into an area where, being tired all the time, every person listening to this right now in North America who's doing shift work is tired all the time. And not all of them have low testosterone. So these are things that they should go to their doctor, have properly evaluated, because it could be one of a million other things. They could be undiagnosed celiac disease. They could have low vitamin B12. There could be nutritional disorders. There are many, many things. So we don't want to give guys the idea that go get testosterone, it'll fix it. But it may. In your case, it did, and your beard looks fantastic.
Thank you. I oiled it. I oiled it just for this.
It's incredible.
Yeah, thank you.
So I think it's important not to give people the idea that there's some kind of magic bullet. Members come in all the time and they just want the answer. And you know what I say? I had one today, a guy that I've had great difficulty with over many months. And I finally said, look, there is no bullet, because he wants a bullet and he wants to get back to work. And it just doesn't work that way,
Yeah.
Well, see, Adam, when I stopped working shifts 7 years ago, I went about a year and working straight days, loving it. I haven't had I used to get the puke flu 3 to 5 times a year because of the sleep deprivation. I haven't been sick since that time, but I did do the TRT, and I've been doing it for 5 years now. But it's part of a regime. I'm increasing my fitness, I'm 56 years of age. I want to collect my pension longer than I put into it. So that puts me about 85 years of age. But the TRT with health, with extra fitness, nutrition, water, it is a fountain of youth for older, and for the older viewers here. When I hit 50, my body started all those years where you would never do warm-ups for university sports and dynamic warm-ups and that stuff. Man, oh man, it really came back to hit you. And a lot of injuries just came around that you just never had. So like you said, it has to be part of a regime, but I'm all medically supervised as well.
Yeah. I think that's the key point of all of this is definitely the medical supervision, regular blood work, all of that kind of stuff should be part of that. So, but again, consult your doctor, Don't listen to my dumb ass. I'm wearing a flamingo shirt, for Christ's sakes.
Adam, Mark made a comment. He talked specifically about how routines can be difficult because of shift work.
Yeah.
You can get a lot done in a little. And that's the thing that I think we really need to speak to. Sometimes people get this mindset that I've got to have 2 hours to go to the gym.
Right.
No, you don't, man. If you can get 30 minutes in, that's something. If you get 20 minutes in, that's something. And people are like, well, it doesn't really count. It counts. It does count. I'm a big fan of all kinds of different, non-traditional stuff than what's in a gym. I'm a big fan of, there's a company called Brute Force. They build these awesome sandbags. The stuff that you can do with a sandbag that literally requires nothing more than a 3 foot wide by 6 foot space anywhere. You don't even have to go to the gym. Get it done in your house.
Banding.
Yeah, just all kinds of stuff.
When I travel, it's a band. I have a whole series of bands when I'm traveling. And we need to teach them about that, because that's their resistance, is the time. Do I have the time? And does the agency give me time to go to the gym? And I'm sure, Nate, you can speak to that. There's a multitude of things that you can do to stay super fit and super strong with short bouts of exercise.
Can I just say something real quick? I think, and this is something that I've noticed in conversations that I've had with people. If you're an officer and you're waiting for your agency to give you paid time to go to the gym, and that you're like, I'm not working out without getting paid for it, you're a fucking idiot. I'm just gonna put it out there and speak frank, but that's the truth, because I've talked to a lot of people. They're like, well, I don't get paid for that, so why would I spend my own time? And I'm like, that makes absolutely zero sense. So I just
there's a trainer by the name of Dave Smith. And my folks in the United States remember JD Buck Savage. And I sat in a training course with him one time, and he said probably the most powerful thing I ever heard. No law enforcement agency has ever died in the line of duty. It's true. It's the individual officer. It's you. It's not up to your agency. It's up to you. Whether it's paying for additional training, whether it's finding the time to work out, it's not up to them. It's up to you. And people get the wrong mindset. They got to take their responsibility on their own.
Yeah, I love that. We were just at a National Guard H2F kind of inaugural event, and the lead for basically the education surrounding H2F for the National Guard was telling the states, like, if you're waiting for us to show up with a giant paycheck and the solution and put it in your lap, like, it's not going to happen. You're going to be waiting there a long time. And what he said to him was, you need to self-extricate. Like, you need to figure out your own way to start embracing and start implementing some sort of H2F program. And I even love, Doug, that you use the word regimen instead of routine, because I think part of it is like, look, this is a way of life. This is a whole interrelated process of all these different interdependent things, like sleep, like exercise, like nutrition, that are supporting another, forget the word I'm looking for here. It's getting late, but supporting, your TRT, for example. And so you don't have to rely on necessarily a routine. There are countless points throughout the day where you have the opportunity to make a better, even if not the best, lifestyle decision. And I know for me personally, I struggle with that because in kind of my Ranger days, we grew up in extremes. So we were either like all conditions were perfect to apply stress, recover from it, be the best version of ourselves, or it was like all hell is broken loose and we're so far from ideal that we are throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And when I segued into a quote normal civilian life, I struggle with kind of how to reconcile that, because I didn't have those extremes to push me into one condition or another. So instead it became a matter of like, oh God, this is a 24-hour a day normal lifestyle thing. This is a regimen where I need to start making smart decisions consistently, because I'm not going to get bailed out by a week of no access to alcohol, by a week of, hey, we're all in bed by this time, like it or not. We're all getting fed decent, meals 3 times a day. We're all training regularly, whatever it is. And so you have to self-extricate. I had to find a way to say that word again since I screwed it up 3 times. And I think that's important, is like, yeah, you're not on a routine, but it doesn't mean we're adopting a victim mentality here. There's still a lot of things that you can control. So focus on those.
Yeah. We have a whole behavioral sleep medicine program devoted just to shift work that actually addresses what Nate is saying. And it takes into account whether the shift worker is an athlete. So, we have quite a few officers doing triathlons and Ironmans and stuff like that are really demanding training schedules, all the way down to people who are just trying to be fit and whatnot. And so it's all about the core is, what is the shift? What's the rotation? Okay, now let's look at recovery. And now let's look at activity. And can we get the activity to the volume and intensity required for the outcome, which could be, a marathon or whatever. And we're, altering their training schedules accordingly.
One of the quotes or the questions here was with the difficult maintaining shifts, work schedules, and such. There's so many little micro opportunities when you're on the road. Don't take the elevator on a call for service. Walk the stairs. Don't go in the drive-through. I really hate seeing cruisers in a drive-through. For one reason, it's lazy. 2, you could actually get out and talk with people and say, hey, how you doing? They could see you're the good officer that you are. But what happens if you're stuck in a drive-through at a restaurant, 2 cars in front, 2 cars in back, officer needs assistance, you can't get out of that line and your buddy dies. So, Nate, to your point, I don't even like motivational speaking. I say it's inspirational speaking. Motivation, you get someone to do something for a while, they don't follow through. Inspiration, or what we're talking about, is lifestyle changes. And when you inspire someone that's in spirit, and if you can help them change their lifestyle, as we're all talking, right from day one, even before they get on the job, that's something that's going to stick around with them forever. And then we give them the tools of the regiment or the regime to support that.
You almost need to just put the word tactical with it to get the behavior change, right? Hey, don't go to the drive-through. It's a tactical decision. You could get pinned down. Hey, take the stairs. It's more tactical because you could get caught in the elevator in a gunfight, right? If we apply tactical, put Velcro on it, charge them 30% more.
It's true.
We're all over it.
And here like I thought I was the one with the marketing undergrad, Lon. You got me beat.
It's like I've got a boat. If they put the word marine in front of it, they charge you 40% more.
I think that's a good point, though. And somebody had actually mentioned in the comments something along the lines of engaging people early. And then I would say also like consistent, frequent microdoses throughout the course of their career from now until forever. And then, of course, there are going to be small changes that account for those different cycles of an officer's career. But you got to start that conversation earlier. And I think that also brings up the topic of who's coming into the academy now versus who is coming in even just 20 years ago. I just got off the phone earlier with my buddy Brad, and he just did a research project with Miami-Dade where they compare that data, and it's very, very clear and statistically significant, the difference just in the last 20 years in terms of the, quote, quality, at least from a physicality perspective, of the candidate who's coming into the academy. And now the other end of that is how many academies have adjusted accordingly. Do we have new meat, but it's going through the same old meat grinder? And in fact, some of them maybe even try to expedite things because they're so low on officers that they need to get people through quickly.
Right. And I agree 100%. I think what I saw even before I retired, and that was 2017, you saw people that had no training experience, no sporting experience. I was down in Tucson doing a DT class, and the class was 50 kids. I say kids, you know what I mean? And we split it in 2 days, and we're training with these kids. We're doing red man drills and a bunch of other stuff. And I had to ask, I'm like, how many of y'all have ever been in a fight before? And out of the 25 in the first day and the 25 in the next, none of them had ever been in a fight. And then when I asked the question, how many of y'all had ever played any type of competitive sport? It was out of 50, it was 17. Yeah. So they weren't even really involved in any athletics or any type of sporting activity. So conditioning, number one, the work ethic, number two, and the understanding that sometimes this stuff sucks. Deal with it and push on. But yeah, I mean, So do we have academies? My question, do we have academies not just pushing people through faster? Are we lowering standards to get people through the doors? And that's my bigger concern.
I think without a doubt, and if you lower the standard, then you need to look to upgrade and extend the academy to get people up to the same, the same standard as they go out of it. And actually, Troy from Indiana State Patrol just popped in. I didn't look at his comment yet in the chat, but he's the human health and performance lead for Indiana State Patrol and their academy setting. And they're doing a lot of great things, actually. So it's worth looking at what he has to say.
What do you guys think? We've got a lot of females that are watching this right now. In Ontario, they represent 54% of our population. And right now we're studying about 25% of our workforce. Obviously, once they go off of maternity, their body is physiologically changing. Have you guys had a lot of experiences bringing them back post-pregnancy that we can share with anyone watching to give them some assistance?
So what I'll say for me, most of the females that I've worked with in the actual tactical setting, I haven't really engaged with that scenario too much, but I consult pretty regularly with a few who do. And for them, it's just a matter of being extremely individualized, because it is such a case by case and there's no real blanket statement. And I haven't read it yet, but the Army actually just revised some of their return to duty postpartum policy for females. And it's something Vernon and I are looking into now, is creating a female specific course for the tactical professional. But that would be something where we would provide a platform and invite other experts who are honestly more well-versed, because most of our experience and our bias is with males, at least on the tactical professional front. And most of our female training has been outside of law enforcement, outside of military even, and been more on either general population, high school female athletes, some older endurance athletes, stuff like that.
Well, I think just generally speaking, getting people, women that have gone through pregnancy, it depends on how within the norm the pregnancy was, right? I mean, are we talking somebody who was able to give birth vaginally? Do we have to do cesarean? Were there any type of additional complications? All that starts to play in to how quickly we can get them back into physical activity, or physical activity to a point where we have a baseline where you start doing more intense physical activity. And it is case by case. To do a blanket, I don't think is fair. I don't think it's going to really give you a good benchmark. But what we also do know is what we believed about women being able to stay active and strength train and everything else while they're pregnant 20 years ago, 30 years ago, is very different than what we know today. So today, if you've been doing it, short of a contraindication, keep doing it, and things are usually going to work out pretty well. Again, consult with your doctor. This is not medical advice that we're giving.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, Lon, that's a great point, because at First Group, for example, when I was coaching there, we had a cognitive performance coach, we had dietitian, we had strength coaches, physical therapy, et cetera. And, when folks were being pulled from the line for an injury or something else, or an impending surgery, we would start the work ahead of time to try to get them in as good a place physically and mentally prior to their procedures, so that afterwards their return to duty was expedited. And I think that's another reason why it's so important to engage on the front end, because that's definitely going to lead to a better outcome afterwards.
I know Amy Boudreau is going to jump in here probably within the next 15 or so. So she'll be a good resource too to kind of follow up with that question as well. But there's a very specific question here, and I want to make sure we get to it for Dr. Samuels. And the question is, are you seeing any issues with sleep disorders among law enforcement officers? I seem to be hearing more and more from older officers being diagnosed with sleeping disorders, such as idiopathic hypersomnia and narcolepsy. And during their careers, they are downing energy drinks and caffeine to help them stay awake. So, floor is yours, sir.
Yeah, so that's actually my job. So sleep disorders are ubiquitous in law enforcement, and just the nature of shift work, at least in a shift work population, at least 30% of shift workers have a sleep disorder. So the prevalence is quite high. And so our clinic receives referrals from the RCMP and the Calgary Police Service continuously. There's somebody's sound on in the background. Sorry, guys. And so, yes, the prevalence of sleep disorders in law enforcement populations has been studied, and Harvard did a really nice survey. Now, this is going back 10 years, but the number one sleep disorder is actually obstructive sleep apnea. And our experience is that it's fascinating how when you diagnose and treat it, officers, it changes their life in a shift work setting, because to struggle with untreated sleep apnea and be a shift worker is a double whammy. As far as idiopathic hypersomnia and narcolepsy, that would be unbelievably rare in this population, extremely rare. So I would say no to those two in particular, but insomnia and obstructive sleep apnea, absolutely, very, very prevalent. And then the other is parasomnias, which end up in violent behavior and sleep. So I have officers coming in from a variety of different units, actually attacking their wives in the middle of the night in their sleep. So not intentionally. And that can be quite dangerous and destructive. And that's part of the whole problem of PTSD. And we have a direct sort of pipeline from the operational stress injury clinic here in Calgary to us with sleep disturbance. So patients who experience PTSD or been diagnosed with PTSD, the prevalence of sleep disturbance in PTSD is literally greater than 80%. So we see almost everyone who's in the program not responding to the treatment the psychiatrists have implemented at the operational stress injury clinic. So yeah, it's a very common problem in law enforcement. The more common disorders are insomnia, obstructive sleep apnea, and then parasomnias would be the most common.
So Dr. Samuels, I just want 2 quick questions for you. One, to kind of cycle back to what we started our whole conversation off before you jumped on, which was Texas DPS setting restrictions on the size of their officers. So one of my questions is, with sleep apnea, if that's so prevalent, isn't weight a factor in sleep apnea potentially?
Yeah.
And the other question I have with you is if you can define or explain parasomnia a little bit more for those who don't understand it, including myself.
Sure. Yeah. So you make a good point, Adam, although the original research done in law enforcement, which was in excess of 5,000 officers in North America that were studied through just an online screening process, weight actually wasn't a major factor, predictive factor of obstructive sleep apnea in a law enforcement officer. So that's important. So while weight is generally considered a risk factor for obstructive sleep apnea, and certainly it is, it's not necessarily the case in a law enforcement officer. Okay. So, and there's a lot of theory around that, actually, one of which is sitting in a cruiser for hours on end. And I can get into the physiology of that. But the bottom line is weight isn't a major factor in law enforcement populations, although it is a risk factor in the general population for obstructive sleep apnea. This idea of size with officers, the whole reason you're doing this, is important because all of those officers, if they are obese, which would be a BMI of greater than 30, should be screened for sleep apnea. Absolutely, without question, because truck drivers have to be screened for sleep apnea because it's an occupational risk in a safety sensitive occupation. So a parasomnia is, so insomnia occurs within sleep. In other words, it's difficulty falling asleep and staying asleep. A parasomnia is an event that occurs outside of sleep. So it's during the sleep state, but it's not generated by the sleep state necessarily. And so sleepwalking occurs and is a parasomnia. It's one of the parasomnias. Sleep talking is a parasomnia. Nightmares, night terrors, flashbacks are all parasomnias if they occur during sleep. And the most extreme end is violent behavior in sleep, which is tied to a condition called REM behavior disorder, which this is extreme violence in sleep. And my most sort of classic example is a power engineer working up north on 12-hour rotating shifts for 30 days, ended up slitting his wrist down to the median nerve with his hunting knife in his sleep. So things like that can happen, and no psychiatric illness whatsoever. So there was no mental health issue. It occurred during sleep.
Dr. Simmons, I got a question for you. We know a lot of the health benefits associated with sleep. Specifically, are we seeing that lack of sleep tied into autoimmune disorders at all?
Oh, that's kind of a very specific question. So, I mean, autoimmune disorders are an extremely wide variety of different disorders that cross many different physiologic systems. So at the end of the day, my response to that would be sleep is disturbed in autoimmune process. Yes. And there's a host of reasons why that occurs, but I wouldn't be any more specific than that because it depends on the disorder.
Do you have any like self-screening recommendations or sort of that first line of defense, I guess?
For what?
For sleep. So in other words, like you were saying, like, hey, these folks should get screened for sleep. But what about like a self-screening option or just something to at least introduce that piece to the officer in a more palpable, digestible way?
Yeah, so that's what we do in the program, this RCMP fatigue management training program. So, we could talk about that offline, but that part of it is to give the officers the tools to self-assess, do I have a problem? And if that's the case, where do I get help? So, and it's interesting though, I should be able to say to you, Nate, go here and you will get a screening questionnaire. In the world, that doesn't exist actually. So I'm the lead investigator and author of the Athlete Sleep Screening Questionnaire, which was developed for the Canadian Olympic teams. So all 3,000 Canadian Olympic athletes are screened at the beginning of their season for sleep disturbance. So that type of thing is not available in general for sleep disorders, and certainly not specific to law enforcement.
Not yet.
Not yet.
And if you do see it, you're going to see it here first on the ILET network.
We will work on it. That's
Dr.
our
Salmon
piece is developing psychometric screening tools.
Dr. Sammons, it's really with my benefits through my police service. I have actually been using a CPAP for 6 years, and they buy me a new one every 5 years, and I get new masks every 6 months. But for our viewers, it made a world of difference. I found that and Nate, you're talking about screening. You'd get a good 8-hour sleep. You wake up tired. You're always tired, lethargic. You're punchy. It's almost like being hungover. I find that I literally could go out and have a few drinks one night, wake up hungover, no problem. But the lack of sleep is just debilitating. But can you speak to a little bit about the benefits of a CPAP and explain to people from your perspective?
Yeah. So number one, Nate, this is really simple. First of all, we know that the most common sleep disturbance in law enforcement officers is insomnia. So you can say, do you have difficulty falling and staying asleep? And in particular with a shift worker, do you struggle more with night sleep or day sleep? Most commonly, shift workers struggle with day sleep. That's really important because it's physiologically counterintuitive to sleep during the day. And that's a circadian driven phenomena. So that's a simple thing that you can do in screening people, or anyone who's listening can just ask themselves, I really struggle after 4 hours. So I'll go home, have breakfast, go to bed at 8 or 7. And you know what? I can't get past noon. And that happens more and more as the officer ages. And they'll tell you, I get up at noon now. I can't get my 8 hours or my 7 hours. I just can't do it anymore. And so we come up with strategies to help them get back to sleep and get enough sleep. So that's one on the insomnia side. On the sleep apnea side, bottom line, if you are obese, you have sleep apnea. If you snore and wake up tired, you have sleep apnea. You need to go to your doctor and get tested. It's that simple.
Hey, Adam, I think we need to talk about the ugly in the room, which is the use of chemicals when it comes to this. We've talked a little bit about pre-workout, but the cycle that we see, right? High amount of caffeine, all the pre-workout, and then I'm going to go on the back end. If I just have a drink or two, it's going to help me sleep. And then that's the cycle over and over and over again. So I'm not getting quality sleep in any way when I am sleeping, because I'm still, spun from all the pre-workout, that whatever it happens to be. And that's another thing that I've seen within the law enforcement world. Aside from the shift aspect, you see that even with your day shifters, but you also see it significantly with the other folks. And it's the snake eating its own tail.
Can I address that, Adam? Because I think there are three things that the audience needs to hear. First, I just want to go back to Doug and say that, sleep apnea can be treated by a multitude of modalities. The most common is CPAP. And officers, I often have to have a conversation with them, especially if they're younger. Look, let's just try this thing because you're sleeping with scuba gear at night. And let's just see you in a month or whatever. If you feel better, we can discuss carrying on or moving on to an alternative, dental appliances. And we refer people for surgery for sleep apnea as well. But we have very good surgeons in the city. As far as the compounds go, I think it's super important for all of the people listening to hear very loud and clear: alcohol ruins sleep. Alcohol ruins the restorative quality of your sleep. The reason people drink alcohol is because it puts them to sleep. It does not keep them asleep. In fact, it has the ability to wake you in the middle of the night. That's the problem with alcohol, is that you don't actually sleep continuously. So it's a really bad drug for sleep, but your goal is just to get knocked out. But that's not what gives you a good quality sleep. It's the same with over-the-counter sleep aids, which are usually antihistamines disguised in pretty wrappings, and you will end up sleeping but not feeling rested. And that is the goal of sleep. You must wake up rested. Okay. And most of the people are just shaking their heads going, that hasn't happened for like 10 years. But the point of sleep is to be rested. Okay. Nicotine in any form, and in particular now with vaping, because they're very high concentrations, is extremely stimulating to the cortex of the brain. And you need to know that. So while some people will smoke to relax and then go to sleep, the nicotine actually disturbs the state of sleep, the restorative quality of sleep. Okay, so that's really important. And caffeine, I think, is really important. So not so much energy drinks, let's say. I'm neither here nor there on the energy drink side, as long as they're used strategically. That's the key, is using caffeine and energy drinks strategically, not ubiquitously or indiscriminate. So caffeine can be used very effectively as an alerting agent when you know you're fatigued, or you can use it with a nap to recover cognitive performance. And these things are well tested. They're used by NASA, the US military, and they're very good strategies. But the large amount of caffeine and the closer to sleep, the more it will disrupt, again, the quality of sleep.
Well, while we're on the topic of chemicals, we're Canadian, so we might as well discuss it. Let's talk about marijuana and marijuana derivatives, CBD oil specifically. But because also in the United States, there are states now that have just put out new policies and laws, I guess, not policy, where officers are able to utilize things off duty. And stuff like that. So I'd like to get your thoughts on CBD oil specifically when it comes to sleep.
Oh, so you're asking me, eh?
Yeah, you're the doctor. Yeah, that's how this works usually.
Yeah, so here's the line on any cannabis, any formulation of cannabis. And I just happen to be luckily, I sit on a national group that is looking at this issue. And we do have researchers across the country looking specifically at the role of cannabinoids in sleep. Number one, there is literally no legitimate evidence that any cannabinoid does anything for sleep. That research is being done, but we don't actually have the evidence and the quality of evidence that would allow it to be prescribed for sleep. So that's the bottom line. Now, when I'm seeing patients in the clinic, I have to be honest, law enforcement officers don't often use cannabis because they can't. And so it would be rare, I would think. But we have lots of patients coming in using cannabis. And I say to them, if it's working for you, off you go. I have a doctor who's more of an expert in using cannabinoids, and I'll refer that patient to the doctor for better advice if they want it. But the big concern with cannabis is, first of all, it's being dispensed by complete non-healthcare trained individuals. It's marketed and sold with absolutely no evidence whatsoever other than personal experience. And we've seen some disastrous examples of hospital admission due to withdrawal from cannabis products, like really bad. And so there's a big downside to it when it doesn't work.
Awesome. Thank you. Anybody else on the panel interested in jumping on that grenade?
No, I think it's a critical one to discuss. I mean, because you're right, Adam. You're seeing some states, and even in the United States, talking about it and kicking it around more and more. You're still seeing a resistance to it, and the pro marijuana industry, culture, whatever it is, it's the best thing since sliced bread. It cures cancer. It cures emphysema. It's the cure all for everything. Is the message that you're hearing, but whether that pans out or not, that's a whole nother issue, as Doc said. And we talked about that. We talked about alcohol, the stimulants, and more so the one that bothers me is the energy drinks that you don't always know what's in them.
Right.
Yeah. Back in the day when I was working as a trainer, I had a couple of clients that were in the healthcare industry, and I'm like, hey, what is this stuff? And I'll never forget it. He called it mono-guano-sodium dibatshit because they weren't sure what was in it.
Right.
And you see more and more of that proprietary blend.
Yeah.
I don't want to tell you what's in it. Here, go ahead and drink it. I don't know about that.
Yeah, I just sat in on a supplement presentation pretty recently, and proprietary blend was like the one immediate red flag for do not consume. What I'll say with Vernon and myself, we outsource most expertise in the supplement realm to a dietitian, but we do at least broach the subject in a number of different ways. And the one thing I'll say is the deeper that we looked into a variety of extremely popular supplements, and let's say, even the use of something like CBD oil being part of that conversation, is really the evidence for the efficacy of these things is really, really low. And so in any instance, we think that there's a lot of roles for a lot of things to maybe fill some cracks. But what we usually want to do in engaging folks is obviously, on the supplement side, real food first, et cetera. On the sleep side, are you stepping over dollars to pick up dimes just because you're trying to take the easy way out and find that smoking gun? Or are you checking your other boxes of things that are surefire ways to improve your sleep, to improve your movement, to improve your nutrition, body composition, et cetera? And I think that's the biggest point is people are starting a conversation about something very specific in hopes that it's this cure-all. And they're ignoring the 10 things that lead up to it that require a little bit of work, a little bit of, say, self-discipline that are absolutely, proven to work, right? Sleep hygiene.
You know what? And Nate, I'm going to dovetail on that. It's not even that they're proven to work, but it's the 80-20 rule. They work with the biggest effect.
Yeah.
It's not even, this works a little and this, no. This has the biggest impact. You're wanting to take a supplement that might give you a 2% improvement, which, may be great for an athlete, but we're talking about some of these things that have a 30% improvement in your ability to sleep and recover and all this other stuff. And that's the stuff that I'd rather pop a pill. And my concern on some of the supplement stuff comes back to, you know, the back in the day, there was a substance that was a supplement called Agent Orange, right? Some of y'all remember this one, and this stuff was great. All the athletes were taking it and they were just getting yoked. Dan Duchesne, the guy that wrote the Underground Steroid Handbook, was the guy behind it. When they tested it, it had steroids in it. So you got to be careful what it is you're sticking into your body. You don't know in those proprietary blends.
But they're an easy target. They're an easy target, and you know that, Nate. The law enforcement officers are an easy target for these companies, and that's why they need to get, and they're willing to listen. If, you know, we would sit down and have a conversation or talk to them, they go, oh, I didn't know that. And so they want to learn, but they can be sold almost anything. It's like an athlete. You can sell anything to an athlete, you know, and that's why they need help with these things.
Yeah. And it's, you know, in that Wild West, like it's still an unregulated industry. That hasn't changed. You know, it'll really almost blow your mind when you start to look into it.
Yeah.
And I will steal one thing from Vernon here, which is back to Dr. Samuel's point, though, about, hey, if this is working for you, then, you know, have at it. We also like to say, don't take their superpower, you know, and that for us, that's more common with things like recovery devices and stuff like that, because back to your point, Lon, like that might give them the 2%. It might give them absolutely zero, but the same token is it shows that they are at least investing and putting a little bit of intent and intention toward recovery. And so we don't necessarily want to take that from them. We want to use that as a conversation starter that then we can start to add on even more effective approaches on top of it. And then maybe over time, even replace it. But what we don't want to do is say like, hey, great, you just walked in with a foam roller. You know that the research doesn't really support that. Because one, we're probably dead in the water. You know, we just undermine what they think works. And we lost that ability to reinforce what they had was a good intent.
Yeah, you springboard off of it, right? I mean,
yes.
you know, okay, I'm not going to take it away because as soon as I do that, then they feel belittled or down or whatever. You go, hey, you know, that roller that you're using, that's not a bad thing, but let's also add this and let's see how this works out for you. And they see this big effect, and then all of a sudden, hey, I'm spending more time, you know, doing PNF stretching than I am sitting on a foam roller, and I'm really seeing an impact. Oh, good.
I like the I'll be stealing your springboard term. I like that.
Not mine.
Right. Well, we're about 2 hours in here. So this is going phenomenally. Nate and Vernon, I sent you a private message there in the chat. You can get back to me on that one real quick and just let me know. What I'd like to do is we normally do a giveaway here on the on these roundtables, and so what I'd like to do is we're gonna ask a skill testing question, and then the person that answers the question, let's see what we're gonna do here. You can send the answer to send it to adam@ilet.network. That's my email address. And so we'll ask the skill testing question here. And Lon's good at coming up with these. So Lon, I'll give you a few seconds to come up with something. And so he'll ask the question. First one to send the correct answer to that email address is going to win something. And we'll let you know what that's going to be here in a few seconds. So yeah. So Lon, you go ahead, brother. What kind of question do you have for these folks?
Oh, you're on mute.
So we're trying to test our audience base. Is that the question that you're asking?
Yeah, because I think what we're gonna do is the initiative, Nate and Vern's group here, they're new partners with iLet. So I want to give away some of their shit for free. So that's always a good start. So let's do that. Let's give away some of their courses. Or one of their courses to the person who answers the question correctly, and we'll and as you think of the question, I can actually share that a little bit here.
I already got it.
Okay,
I got your question. I'm going to actually piggyback off something Dr. Samuels said. Dr. Samuels talked specifically about an aspect of our human performance, our human dynamic that has some type of cycle associated with it. He used a specific word. What's the word that he used literally not more than 5 minutes ago?
Love it. Okay, awesome. This is for everybody. This is the website, the strategicinitiative.com. I'll put the link in the description here. You can check out what these guys are doing. Obviously it's phenomenal stuff. They have programs for fire rescue, law enforcement, military, obviously, and you see the two handsome gentlemen right there that you've been seeing for the last 2 hours. So they have some courses and certifications in here. We'll figure out which of those we're going to give away, but we'll get that squared away for you when we get the answers in. So let's put that there. All right, so we have about an hour left. We have about an hour left on this. Where do you guys want to take this conversation? I know Amy's going to be jumping in here right away as well, so I'm sure we can throw some stuff at her. But are there any topics when we talk? We're talking about bridging physical fitness and mental health, and I think we've done a phenomenal job interleaving both of those components throughout this entire conversation. So that's great. Is there anything that jumps out like front of mind for you guys here that you're like, we need to make sure we touch on this before we end this call?
Yeah, how about the reality we normalize taking care of our mental health, and that it's absolutely okay to reach out for some professional help before you have an issue, and just check in and dial yourself in. That is the absolute opposite of the law enforcement culture.
Can I?
You got to get a baseline test.
Yeah. Can I speak to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the thing that, in a way, really makes me sad is that I see really seriously affected members, law enforcement officers with PTSD that literally hid from help, not on their own accord, for 10 or 15 years. And that was 10 or 15 years that, had they just felt they could, talk about how they were feeling, they wouldn't have lost their marriage. They wouldn't necessarily be estranged from their children. They would be healthier physically and mentally. But I mean, this is every day for me in the clinic. I'm seeing an officer, and they're coming from the OSI, Operational Stress Injury Clinic. And when I just ask them about their history, it is literally shocking to me. Some will come 6 years in, and they're in their 30s, so very young. Others, they'll be in their 50s and just shake their head and go, we didn't talk about this. So, I only figured out I had PTSD in 2019 because I went off the friggin' rails. So I think it's so important that it's a tough job, and you need to be macho to be a cop, but you need to understand the importance of looking after the main organ in your body, which is your brain. It runs the show.
And Dr. Samuels, that makes a lot of sense. 1992, 93, I show up to a call for service where there's in Guelph, they put the leaves in the gutter. It was Devil's Night. I'm told it's a mannequin and someone's being a dumbass. It's a dead 12-year-old little boy who was crushed. My training officer calls me a fucking baby. I'm a wimp and really toxic masculinity. Call me all these nasty names. At that point, you're raised in a generation where real men don't cry, so you suppress yourself. That was 92, 93. I crashed in 2007. So what you said is very, very real. You run from yourself. You take risks. You become an adrenaline junkie. You lose a marriage. You do some really, really strange behavior. And I think that's really important. Thanks for saying that.
But that's survival too. So in other words, I don't want people to get the impression that your story, which is repeated over and over and over again in many officers, this is how we survive.
Yeah.
This is what we do to survive these situations. And we'll do pretty crazy things to protect ourselves that down the road just fall apart.
Right.
And so it's not a bad thing. I mean, it's what we do. But if we could just give people the permission and the place to go get someone to talk to, it would be huge, and it's not a weakness. There's a very good book, and I will recommend this mostly to the male officers, but it's called Being a Kind Father. Sanders, I think, is the author. He's a Canadian author, and it is like, Doug, you would understand this. There's a history behind how you reacted in that situation and then responded for 15 years.
Yeah.
There is actual understanding behind that, like why, in my generation, man, you didn't talk about nothing.
No.
You're just a wall. And so it's really, there is really good social science behind why we were raised that way, our generation, from the 60s, the 50s, and the 60s and 70s. Yeah.
There was and for me, the one neat thing was the terminology. There's a fellow, I saw him speak, his name was Lieutenant Colonel Francois Grenier. He was a Canadian military officer, and it's all in terminology. While I respect people who have post-traumatic stress disorder, he coined it post-traumatic stress injury. And he equated it like you blow your knee, you get surgery, you get therapy, you go back to work. You still have the scars, but I like that terminology better because it instills a version of hope. I can fix it. I'm still going to have scars. I'm going to go back to normal. And I think, sadly, too many people in our profession are Google diagnosing themselves with PTSD, which totally undermines those people that are truly suffering from it. But I like the positive terminology behind the PTSI versus PTSD.
Yeah, and that's why
the industries.
The Operational Stress Injury Clinic is specifically phrased a stress injury clinic.
Good.
Because it is.
You got
an
folks
injury.
in the industry that are arguing over D or I, PTSD, PTSI. I don't care. Yeah. How about we just deal with the fact that we just call it PTS, post-traumatic stress, and everything that lends itself after that. Yeah. What can we do to mitigate that? I get to do a lot of work with Dr. Robbie Adler Tapia, and she's got a book, One Badge, One Brain, One Life, and that's specifically what it's about: building resiliency prior to, and then how to deal with once we get exposed, and how to take care after. But we don't normalize it. Right? We don't do anything to say it is okay to talk about this. And not only is it okay, you need to do it.
It's part of the job. I mean, you're being hired to be a law enforcement officer. Like that's the job, is stress injury.
So sorry guys,
I forget who said it, but sorry, go ahead, Adam.
No, I'm just gonna jump in here real quick. So we have a new guest to add into the conversation. So Amy Boudreau. Amy, welcome. Thanks for joining us here. Wow, which way is the best way to do this with 7 people? I don't know. Now we're all off center. Way to go, Amy.
Evening, gentlemen. Jumping in.
Good evening.
Just giving her the gears the second she gets here. And appreciate you taking the time to join us, Amy. Real quickly for everybody here, the question from Lon for the free giveaway here is: what are the 24-hour cycles that are part of the body's internal clock running in the background to carry out essential functions and processes? And so if you have an answer to that question, again, you can email me, adam@ilet.network. The first people to do that, first thing that you're going to win is you're going to win. Let me see if I can find this here. Hang on a second. Wait one. There's a special certification course that Nate and Vernon have put together, and so I'm not going to steal their thunder. Nate or Vernon, maybe you know what, Vernon, you're going to take this one because you've been there sitting in the background. So can you explain a bit about this course and what people can expect?
Am I?
Yeah, you're on.
I don't think I'm muted. Yep. Okay. I mean, this is something me and Nate's been working on for quite a while, taking a lot of our experiences that we had working in the tactical profession, and now from a formal education standpoint, and bringing it to the law enforcement officer or the firefighter, whoever it is, specifically made for them. I think one of the biggest things me and Nate, when we talked about developing this, is it's not just the tactical professional, but it's each individual one. No different than I wouldn't train a pitcher, different than I'd train a volleyball player. There are different things. There are different things that they deal with on a daily basis. So this certification is specifically made for those professions and the needs that they have. And encompasses everything from diet, nutrition, to physical readiness, to stress, a lot of that behavioral stuff that Nate was talking about earlier, but just meeting them where they are. That's the biggest takeaway from the certification is it's not us just trying to influence what we think is right or putting our thumb down on them, but it's truly trying to meet them where they're at. And we got that from meeting those professionals, interviewing SWAT officers, interviewing firefighters, getting their firsthand knowledge and their expertise so that we can bring that to those through an online platform to help them the best.
That's awesome, brother. I love this course. You guys let me take a look through it, walk through it. I think it's phenomenal. Otherwise, obviously, we wouldn't be giving it away. Otherwise, it wouldn't be on our platform. Just so we're going to give this out. The first person to answer that question correctly is going to get that. And I think it's a $500 value. So massive thank you to you guys for taking that hit and giving that away to one of the officers here. That's phenomenal. Don't worry, if you're the runner-up, there's you're not going to miss out as well. Doug, I think we're going to make you give away a book too. Right?
Hey, wait a minute. I want in on this course, and I know the answer to the question.
Didn't you come up with the question?
I'm going to see if I can get you like 7% off or something.
Oh, thanks.
Doug, give us a quick overview of the book because I was honored and humbled that you asked me to write a review of your book. I got to read it before it even came out, and I loved it. I told you how much that the story touched me personally from my experience. And so just maybe give us a quick overview of that because it ties into exactly what you were just talking about and sharing with the panel anyways.
It was really cool. Obviously, you did the Tactical Breakdown podcast with me, and I talked about baby Emily, talked about some early childhood trauma that I had. One of my best friends in high school was blown up in Air India. I saw the day before. So the book is called Finding Your Granite, My Four Cornerstones of Personal Leadership. It talks about my descent into darkness and how being an elite athlete, training people, coach, counsel, mentoring brought me out of that. And it's about 80% biography, but there's a 20% of self-help because for me, it's about if you go through trauma and you find a way out of it and you get a roadmap, you want to help other people, police, fire, ambulance, whatever the case might be. All the money that I raised is going to go to a charity in Canada that I really subscribe to. It's Veterans and Everyday Heroes. So it's www.v-eh.ca. And what they do is they provide service dogs to our frontline wounded warriors, police, fire, ambulance, nurses, whatever. In Canada, it's $18,000 for a personal support dog. So I'm hoping that all the proceeds here will buy half a dog a paw or what have you. But I just want to pay it forward and help people. And with this, wherever people are, Canada, United States, if they win it, I'll send it to them free of charge. I'll pay for the shipping. And I'll also make a donation to the charity on their behalf.
That's awesome, brother. Thank you for doing that. It's a phenomenal book. You can get it on Amazon. You can go search it out. We'll make sure all the links are posted after this too, so everybody can get a hold of it. And obviously going to an awesome cause. So that's awesome. All right. Well, that being said, and I'll announce those winners when I get a chance to check the email here in a second. But let's continue on with this conversation. We have about 40 minutes left to go on this, less some time at the end to give everybody final thoughts. So, is there anything kind of top of mind now for anybody with the conversations we've been having? Amy, you overheard, you were in the background actually a little bit before I brought you in here. So you overheard some of the conversations. Anything that immediately jumps out to you?
Yeah, first I just want to mention, Doug, thanks for bringing up that you've got a book there that you wrote. And I think the best way we learn is through personal experiences that we've all gone through. It doesn't matter how long you've been in the industry for. At some point, you're going to have personal hardships and experiences. And if we can shed light on some of those for other people to learn what worked for them, I think it's important to kind of share that information. I know I heard the discussion you were talking about post-traumatic stress injury, and I know we talk a lot about resilience, and I heard resilience was brought up. One thing I feel like we don't touch on very often, like I know that we kind of talk about mind-body connection or, staying healthy and physically fit and all these things. We never really talk about the trauma and stress response that we were constantly overexposed to and what that does on our nervous system and in our bodies. And one thing I've been really trying to do is bridge aspects of like yoga and mindfulness within policing. And I know some people might think, well, what the heck does that have to do with policing? But, when we're overexposed to these stress responses, in our bodies unconsciously responding. So it's just the same as the way that you take a breath or the way that your heart beats. You don't think about it. It just happens. So the same way that your body responds to stress, it does the same thing. Your muscles tense up. It's trying to protect your organs and towards these threat responses. So over time, what happens is you're constantly being exposed over and over again. And now we think, okay, like you're just going about your business. You just keep going through, the motions of the job, not thinking about maybe what's unconsciously happening in your body. So ultimately what's happening is these default patterns are being set in your mind and your body of how you respond to stress and whether your body is able to actually come back down to baseline. So what we're not really training members is, okay, we're being exposed to these things, but how do we actually retrain our nervous system? So when you think about resiliency, you want to think of like nervous system flexibility. How well does your body respond to those heightened responses, where I know a lot of you are talking about optimal performance, so that you've got the situation awareness, you can do your job and perform at the optimal performance. But after that, what are we doing to be able to bring our bodies back down to baseline? And so what I find is that we don't really teach people those tangible tools. A lot of times we're talking about resilience and people are like, well, what the heck does that even mean? So I think we really need to getting more clear on, if you've experienced this, or here are some physical symptoms that you might be experiencing. If that's the case, do this. If you're feeling this, do this. This is what it's caused from. So I think if we can kind of break it down from the scientific perspective and giving people that information, then we're going to be able to be preventative with some of the chronic illnesses, or even just the dysfunctions that can happen over time with the irritability or hostility, depression, anxiety, these other things that are symptoms of the nervous system not functioning properly or being regulated. So if we can teach people how to self-regulate on a daily basis, weekly basis, that's built into a wellness routine, not just your diet, not just your sleep health, not just your exercise regime, but like internally, physically, how are we taking care of our internal systems that are going to be able to work optimally during these threats, and then keep us safe long-term, when we're at home in these non-threatening states. Then I think that's where we kind of need to focus. So that's really my goal with some of the work I'm doing in my own organization, but even within our Canadian industry. And I'm really trying to expand that more so over the next couple of years. So yeah, that's kind of the one point I wanted to mention. I know that all of you guys are doing amazing work within your own training organizations. And if you guys can take some aspects of that and bring it into the work that you're doing, I think that will really make an impact.
Yeah, Adam, I think one of the things that we're missing is we talk about the resiliency, we talk about the piece, and getting it so it's relatable to the people that we're dealing with is sometimes the bigger challenge. And one of the things that I think is the easiest is to explain to folks or tie some of the mental health component into the way we work out. If you are exposed to something that's heavy, weights, whatever it is, at some point in time, you need to unload it. You got to get it off your back. If you're continuing to carry it, even if you don't necessarily know that you're carrying it, it's affecting you. So you have to unload it. And whether it's the principle of pain shared is pain divided, or finding a way that you can, as Dr. Robbie speaks, to clear the call, you have to find a way to get that out. And just compartmentalizing it and put it in a little box, which is what most of us do initially, that doesn't clear it. It doesn't unload it. It just puts it somewhere for a little while where you can deal with the rest of the stuff, but you do eventually need to come back to that little box, empty it out, and get rid of it.
Yeah, I think too that tying into that, I mean, Amy nailed it. It's kind of that paper tiger concept, and something Vernon and I talk about in the CERT, with the idea of it's a lot more, dangerous to overlook an immediate threat than it is to see a threat where there isn't one, at least in the short term. But the problem is, once this becomes a chronic thing, which is a lot of what she was talking about, is when it starts to creep back into our life. And then even somebody earlier, and I forget who it was, but mentioned the idea of like, that is an effective strategy in the short term. But what happens when that strategy that saved you momentarily is starting to literally cost your life in an extended period over time. And I think the other thing worth mentioning is in the idea of treating it like we do physical training, et cetera, is also not just being reactive about it, but being proactive about it. And what's, I think, kind of ironic, and again, something we discussed a little in the CERT, is we almost found ourselves as tactical professionals, when we were tactical professionals, better equipped to acutely handle extreme trauma than we were equipped to deal with what Vernon would refer to as that low hum that's just kind of constantly in the background building over time, almost unbeknownst to us. And then suddenly that low hum is what overtakes us and ends up being such a detriment to our health. So it's like, walking in the door and dealing with the family stuff, which shouldn't be the main stressor, actually becomes what puts you over the top, as opposed to whatever that traumatic situation you were dealing with in the moment. I'm going to keep going since there's a moment of silence, because to tie it back to one other thing worth mentioning is injury prevention is a big way that, folks kind of, I guess, sell physical training in the law enforcement space, right? So we can prevent injuries, or injury risk mitigation is really what we would say. And then the idea being that there's an ROI due to cost savings, time lost due to injury, et cetera, et cetera. But what I would say is, if you don't have a baseline of psychological health and you are not regularly evaluating components of psychological health and precursors to it within your quote injury prevention program, then you're missing a big piece, even if we're only talking physical, even if we're not talking about psychological injury, because psychological health and it degrading is actually a huge precursor to a physical injury as well. And so you're leaving a lot off the table if you're not also including that proactively, both having a baseline and then routinely comparing some sort of self-evaluation or whatever it is to that baseline as a way to evaluate, where somebody sits compared to the potential for them becoming injured.
Nate, I really like what you're saying. I want to add to that too, because I think part of that comes also back to a self-awareness piece, because I know we can talk about baseline, but some people might not even know what does that even mean, and what should I even feel like what is normal, or what is healthy, or you know what I mean? So I think, and every individual is different. So how you respond to a threat, or how you perceive something, or how you handle conflict, whether that's at work or whether it's in your personal life, or what are the signs and symptoms when you are starting to feel agitated? What are your maybe even emotional triggers where, now you're going to be in a heated argument with someone instead of being able to de-escalate. So I think it's really important that, and that's why I try to tie in the mindfulness piece, because it's really getting to understand your own body, understanding what your own patterns are. What does that feel like? Because once you start to bring awareness to that, then you're able to see what these slight differences are in yourself, so that you can actually do self-reflection and check in with yourself, so that, hey, you know what, I'm feeling off. Maybe I don't know if this is anxiety, or I don't know what I'm feeling. I just know I'm not myself. And so then, to your point with being proactive and trying to be able to figure out, what are some of the tools I could be doing to kind of make those adjustments as you're kind of moving through it, because you want to work through those things when you're feeling them, or when you've had, a really intense call or a situation that you've gone through. I know you mentioned usually tactical units, they have a lot more training in that, because they are regularly training with the same team. They're very, very high acute situations. So they're talking about it. They're debriefing a lot more. So they have routines a little bit better than maybe, let's say, the average frontline officer that maybe doesn't have the same, type of training, to that extent. So that's why I think it's really important to have self-awareness and develop that on your own as well, to tap into that and then notice, okay, what changes do I kind of need to make? You know, and again, coming back to the mindfulness and yoga, some people might say, well, I prefer working out. I want a HIIT training. I want to sweat. That's all great for, you know, your heart and your physical fitness, but you need supplemental things that are going to support you in other ways. That's more holistic. Biopsychosocial, spiritual. It's a total package. It's not just one or the other. And if you're missing something, that's where the gap's going to come in, and it's going to sneak in. You're not going to realize, you know, kind of what's shifted. So, you know, that's why the yoga piece, you know, there's postures and movements and stretches that activate your parasympathetic nervous system. It turns off your threat response. It helps you feel safe and secure in certain postures. Our psoas muscle that connects our legs from our torso, like our hips, that's our fight or flight muscle. A lot of the times it's really, really tight. But there's ways that you can activate that because our bodies are super smart, very intelligent. If you give it the right environment, your body can heal itself. There's certain exercises you can actually do to activate releasing stored tension that you get from stressful situations. But if you don't know the techniques or the tools, well, then you're just going to keep living about your life. You're going to keep working out those hard workouts, and you're going to train hard, but that adds more stress, more cortisol, and other things. You need to understand some of the other components that are kind of working, you know, because your systems are synchronized, right? So you can't just leave one of them out. And anyway, I think sometimes people overlook that. So I love that we're having this discussion and that you guys are bringing it into, like I said, the work that you guys are doing.
And Amy, that's so true. When I met my counselor in 2007, whether you call it yoga breathing or tactical breathing, when you're on a busy Friday night, it's fight after fight after fight after fight after fight downtown University Town. So your adrenaline dumping so much. But after the crash in 2007, sitting back and having that reflective piece to just come down for a sec, you know, it's you know, and they get ready to go for the next one. We always talk about, you know, what mental process you get involved with to get ready to start your shift. You know, through the shift, we just go through. No one ever thinks about your shift as a bunch of small micro opportunities to get tactical breathing or yoga breathing just to recuperate. But then no one ever talks about when shift is done. You go straight home, you run to soccer practice for the kids, but you owe it to yourself and to your family to have the same mental preparation to de-escalate from being the cop to going back to being the dad or whatever the role might be. We always look at to warm up to get ready for work, but we forget that we need to, you know, bring it down on those micro opportunities throughout work and then de-escalate, because we owe our families, you know, the cops shouldn't come home. The person that your family loves should come home. And you got to learn that process as well.
And I love that you said that about resetting in between calls too, right? Because, and there's little tricks. So breathing, yes, anchors you. And it's like the easiest thing you can do to anywhere. There's also little things you can do too, where like tapping, taking turns, tapping other side of your arm, because it's switching your brain chemistry from the amygdala, which is your fight or flight, and it's forcing it to the front, the prefrontal cortex, where that's your thinking mind. And so you're changing the the firing synapses, and so that will change your energetic state and your body chemistry too, to kind of calm your system down in between. Like there's just little things you could do in between to kind of reset.
I think one of the challenges we have to at least acknowledge, though, is we talked about baseline, but trauma affects our self-awareness.
Yeah.
So
changes your brain.
It goes back to, we may need some professional intervention. And even you go to your doctor once a year for an annual checkup. Let's go to somebody who can provide some mental health for an annual checkup, because you don't know where you're at. If the trauma's already affected you, I don't know necessarily where my baseline is. I know how I feel right now, but that right now is based on all this other trauma that I've been carrying around and maybe not even realizing it. So it might be that opportunity to go, I'm going to go talk to a specialist. I'm going to go talk to a professional, and now go, yeah, my baseline is why I'm broken. I need to fix it.
And
so Amy, I had a question for
Amy. Past trauma.
Amy, I have a question for you. Where would you introduce this? Would it be at depot or after?
So I feel like I feel like there's multiple ways to build this in to our everyday practices. So there's programs that you can put together for, let's say, new recruits coming in. Again, these are teaching techniques like how to reset the nervous system, different breath exercises you can do between calls, different yoga postures that you can do on your own time. But there's stuff if you can even do at work if you're sitting at a desk, because we know the line of work that we're in, it doesn't matter if you're frontline or if you're civilian and you're reading reports and you're helping in other ways. Obviously, secondary trauma affects people in the same way. There's tons of research out there that show that. So if you're working in this industry, it's like, here's the industry you're getting into. Here's what you should know about shift work, how it creates circadian dysregulation. Here's, how to manage it the best you can by your sleep, and when to eat. If you're going to be overexposed to stress and trauma, here's information that you can do. So for me internally, I teach a portion of our mindfulness-based resiliency training course for our officers. Anyone can sign up for that. People will reach out. I will do sessions at work and just educate on trauma and like the effects of that. So I would say like at the early stages, but then I think it's really important to share that with officers who've been on for a long time too, because we weren't trained as recruits. And so we don't have that skill set. So you can't, I know we focus sometimes a lot on recruits because it's like, well, let's fix the next generation coming through. We want to give them the education, but we have a ton of officers and senior officers that everyone's, are experiencing all sorts of different things. And like I said, it doesn't matter, even the higher you go up, even if you're not on the front lines, you're still experiencing as a leader very difficult decisions, crisis responses, and you're making the big decisions, from the whole organization. Like that's a lot of pressure on your shoulders. So it's beneficial for everybody. And it's like, can we create an organization of mindfulness? I think the more we start talking about this throughout all ranks and as an organization, and then we start making programs and changing the culture towards a more well-being mindset. And I think again, we've really shifted probably in the last few years, but there's still a lot of work that we need to do to kind of, break stigma, break the idea of, because it's very stoic, the stuff that we do, we're expected to do our job and turn off certain emotions, but it's not healthy after crisis when you're back at the district or division, or you go back to home to your families and you're turning off those emotions and you're shutting down and you're being tough and, you're not being realistic with some of the, maybe the things that you're experiencing. So anyway, yeah, there's just, I feel like the information is good for preventative, during, and even if someone's injured afterwards. There's tons of research studies that show that even trauma response, right? Trauma sensitive yoga classes and other types of mindfulness classes can actually really reduce a lot of and shift the body state into a healthier operating system. So I think I'm just going to keep pushing and working towards that.
I think you're going to struggle connecting with some folks when you push that, just because guys are still a little freaked out. I think if you change the language and start pushing it on functional movement, which, let's be honest, kind of the same thing, it's just different terminology, but people tend to get very tied up in the power of language. And Adam and I laughed about this before when I started our tactical functional movement. And I didn't have an explosive breaching program. I had a high energy breaching program. Council felt much better about that than explosives. The language is it's still such an important component to get the buy-in from people. Otherwise, how it is. You get people that are, like we said, Doc talked about, law enforcement to be able to do what you do. There is a rough and tumble macho perspective on it. But with that still comes some of those beliefs that need to be adjusted, but they're not getting adjusted in the next couple of months.
Hey, we have a mindfulness topic within our course, but we call it attention, and same reason, just because it's a word that is hard to argue, resonates well, it's very transferable, and it just opens the door for the discussion. It's mindfulness 110%. But we just deliver it under a different term, and we found that's so much more approachable to folks.
Vernon, did you have something to add to that, brother?
I mean, I think it kind of goes back to literally, I mean, I haven't said much on this damn call, if I'm being honest, but at the very beginning when it was what is needed for the physical, whatever. And I said, it's about building value on the word and making it feel important to them. And when do you ever go ask for mental health issues or go to see a therapist? It's after shit went really bad or after there's a negative outcome. And it's always this negative thing. Whereas oddly enough, I see a therapist. I mean, I saw a psychologist when I was in the military, and I see a therapist now. And we actually had my daughter, my wife's idea to have my daughter start to do it. So it was a positive thing. Like she has no problems right now that I'm aware of, outside of maybe some bad parenting moves, I guess. But now it's a positive thing. So that when she does have a negative thing that occurs in her life, whatever it is, that she can bridge that conversation, and it's not that hesitancy of like, oh no, I gotta call the cops now. I got something bad. I gotta call 911. It's, oh yeah, that's familiar to me. I've been there before. This is a conversation that I'm willing to have. And to me, that's where this whole concept of mental health, and we could talk about tough guys doing it. I mean, I work with some of the toughest guys you'll ever meet, and we talk about that stuff all the time because we talked about it when things were great. Some of my football players, we bridge those conversations when life was good. So now when they get cut and things are bad, they know who to call. This isn't like a stranger. This is a friend. This is a relationship that's already been built. And that's what I think it goes back to, that physical aspect, the mental aspect. It's talking about all this stuff at the absolute beginning and building value so that we don't have to convince them. I shouldn't have to convince you to talk to a therapist because you're so much value now, and you know this person that they're very well aware of these things that they have access to.
Well, I think that drives down to two words, right? Culture and leadership.
Yeah.
Like that's what you're talking about, right? I mean, and the question was like, when do we start? How can we implement this in departments? I mean, we said this from the beginning. It's getting those officers at academy or even before academy, so that from day one, it's not taboo to talk about, hey man, I don't feel right after that call. Like we need to let those conversations happen naturally when they should happen. But it does come down to culture, the culture within the department. You know, it's been brought up here multiple times. There's still the old guard, that you can call it, that's still around, that, you know, we don't talk about those things, and leadership. And unfortunately, I mean, there's a lot of phenomenal agencies out there right now that have some super high level leadership that are going above and beyond supporting their officers. But like Dr. Samuel said, there's almost 18,000 agencies in the US, right? We have just under 1,000 here in Canada. And there's not always great leadership. And that's just unfortunate. I mean, that's what we, you know, in the military, we experience the same thing. And Nate and Vernon will say the same thing, right? It's, you have great leaders and you have some not so great. But you kind of have to deal with it. So I think if we can find a way to instill it in each individual officer, show them that lead. And when we say leadership doesn't come from the stars and stripes on your shirt, right? So that's a whole nother conversation for another day. I don't want to go down those rabbit holes, but I just wanted to say that because I think those are some phenomenal points that you guys are bringing up.
Adam, I was going to mention, about the leadership portion. I feel like, you know, like as a leader and making decisions for large organizations, like there's a lot on someone's plate. So they might not necessarily understand fully maybe the direction to take or how to maybe make changes to have that type of impact. So that's why I think collaborating and having people on your team or, you know, who are educator or experts in that field to be able to contribute to some of the research projects or in-house surveys to figure out, okay, what does our organization need? How can we move forward with some of the, you know, evidence that shows, you know, this is the direction we should move into. Even I know a lot of organizations are hiring internal psychologists and then leaning on them to help, you know, create their wellness strategy or understand, because again, as officers, we don't know everything. And as you move up the ranks, you're not going to know everything about every topic. So if you can have advisors or people who are experts that can help contribute about how to tackle or how to create some of these programs, and I would say lean on them if that's your first starting.
I would like to add something to that too, and because this is something that directly relates to conversations that we have all the time in training. I can bring in the best experts in the world to teach their subject matter, but the problem is we're still finding is that those experts are being left in silo. Your mental health, you go over here. Your physical, you go over here. And the problem is that, again, we're not doing a good enough job integrating those and interleaving all of those things together from day one, so that the officer sees how each one of those specialties ties together, and how they can use them. And, maybe you have to shift farther one way here one day, and then you can use another skill set the other day. It's great to bring in experts, but if you don't utilize your experts correctly, you might as well have not brought them in at all.
And Adam, we're starting to see a massive paradigm shift. Like the recruits I teach right now, they're all learning positive mindset, wellness, and all that type of stuff. The sergeant's course that I teach, I'm doing it this week. IQ gets you on the course. The whole course is about EQ. It's about wellness. It's about identifying when your staff aren't feeling well, about your EAP. We actually have 13 phantom employees that all start at a point and they descent into different issues. So the paradigm is shifting now, and it's nice to see that. Hopefully in 5 to 10 years, if someone's having a bad day, they're going to be able, their supervisor's going to come and go, hey, you're having a bad day. Let's talk. But it's a massive cultural change right now. So it's very positive in our province. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So before we're getting down to the wire here with time, and so I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but I also want to do some giveaways, give away some shit. And so looking at the emails here, and this is literally from the emails that I got in order. So the person at the bottom, the first person to send it in, Mark, congratulations. You're going to win that free pass to the law enforcement certification course hosted by Nate and Vernon. So congratulations on that. And Brian, you're going to win a signed, autographed, and copied book from Doug. He'll send that down to you so you can get some Canadian literature in your bookshelf. And we'll go from there. And everybody else, thank you so much for being a part of this. Everybody who sent emails, don't worry, I'm going to make sure we get you something. I don't like anybody walking away empty-handed, so thank you for that. With all of that being said, lady and gentlemen, like I said, we're coming up on time here. So what I'd like to do is make sure that everybody has a chance to share last thoughts, whether you want to summarize kind of what we've talked about, or you want to bring up a topic that we haven't touched on yet. Please feel free to do so. But why don't we just go around the horn and see what's going on there. So Doug, we'll start with you, brother.
Just if people do want the book through Amazon, I only get 8% back, so that really limits my funding towards the veterans and everyday heroes. If people want it, I would encourage them to come out to the website. That way I get 35% back from the book, and I'd much rather give 35% of the $40 the book costs to charity than just the 8%. But just want to thank everyone for showing up today. And from an old dog's perspective, please get that mental health check, because if you go off the rails, you'll do yourself and your counselor a lot of help and good service, because they're going to know where to get you back to. And when I went off the rails, that was my biggest struggle. I was A-type personality. I wanted to get better. I just didn't know what better was, and I wasted a lot of time. So please get that mental health baseline check.
Awesome. Vernon.
I mean, I think this past couple hours have been awesome. I've been loving listening and learning, and it's been interesting to hear different perspectives. So I'm thankful to be a part of it. So thanks for having me on, Adam.
Thanks.
Absolutely. Dr. Samuels. Oh, you're muted. There's always one. Always one.
So I charge my staff $5 if they're muted when we do rounds, but it's a funny joke. Anyways, from the doctor, sleep, breathe, move, and stay hydrated. If any of you have sleep difficulties, you need to go and get help and get them under control.
And apples. Right? Apples?
Yeah.
No? Okay.
Apple a day.
That's what I'm thinking. All right. Lon.
I think the big thing is just normalizing the concept of a mental health day. You know, one day a year that you dedicate that I'm going to ensure that I'm where I need to be. I'm going to make an appointment. I'm going to go see a therapist. I'm going to go see and talk to somebody, whether I think I need it or not, just the way I, go see my doctor for an annual visit, turn your head and cough, the whole 9 yards. I think it's just critical to make that as a baseline, started early in your career, stay with it, stick with it, and keep yourself at a healthy check.
Nate.
Yeah, I think I'll part by, stealing something from a great presentation that we saw the ICP from Dr. Black, which was the idea around trauma-informed leadership. And this is to kind of reinforce some of what Amy was saying with not just being bottom up, but also top down. And I think it's that idea that, especially as professionals in this space on the health side of things, if they claim ignorance, in other words, saying it's not a problem, I think it's pretty easy for us to show leadership or influencers at any level that yes, in fact, it is. And then their next step from that is defensiveness, which is, yeah, I see that it's a problem, but it's not my problem. And that can be a little bit harder to convince somebody that they actually need to own the issue. And that might not be something you can achieve, but where you can come back in again and be extremely influential is if they've reached that next stage, which is helplessness. In other words, okay, I recognize it's a problem. I know that it's my problem, but I don't know what to do. And like for us, for example, at the initiative, that's where we want to come in and say, we know what you can do from here. We know who to link you up with in order to create a robust program that's going to start addressing all of this physical, mental, emotional issues that we've been discussing for the last 3 hours. So I think extremely important to make sure that you're proactively trying to promote within whatever organization you're in that trauma-informed leadership.
Awesome. And Amy, last thoughts.
Yeah, I'll just throw out there, I know some in the comments, people were wondering, how do we get some of these programs started in for our department? So if for those of you who are able to attend, I'm going to be speaking at the International Association of Women Police Conference. It's going to be held in September in Niagara Falls in Canada from September the 12th to the 16th. I don't know what day I'm speaking yet, but I've been doing some amazing, innovative work with our organization, working with our chief psychologist and our executive command team for the last 1.5 years for our wellness bureau. And we have not shared externally some of the wonderful projects that we've seen success based on our research. So we're going to present some of those programs and how we actually got them implemented, kind of like a step-by-step. That way we can help other agencies internationally just kind of share some of the information if it can give them tools or information to help bring that back to their agencies to kind of get things started. That's the impact that we kind of want to create. Also, on a side note, you can give me a follow on social media. I'm the yoga cop, or you can just follow me under my name on LinkedIn, and I'll be posting a bunch of wellness information. It's my passion, and I want to really promote some of the research I've been doing for the last 6 years. So yeah, give me a follow and learn some free stuff.
Nice. Love that. Okay, so for everybody here who's on the call, on the panel, first and foremost, thank you all so much for taking the time and spending it with us here today. I know it's a long time, but man, does it go so fast. You just get so enthralled in the conversations. And I appreciate you guys so much. And so what I'll ask you to do, don't jump off just yet. Stick around for a quick AAR after we kill the live feed. And I'll talk to you guys very, very shortly as we wrap this up. So for all of those people who are still watching this with us, thank you so much for being here and supporting us with the Tactical Breakdown podcast, with ILET. If you want to get more, you want to get in touch with the experts here on the panel, including Dr. Mike Simpson, which you saw earlier. All of those links will be in the description of this video afterwards. It's going to be available on record. So on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on Facebook, you can go back and rewatch this. If you want to share it within your agencies and departments, I definitely suggest you do that. That's why we built this the way we did, so that it's an ongoing resource. You can always come back to this, always revisit the information. But every expert that you've seen here on the panel today, and many, many others, some that were brought up in the conversation, on the chat, everybody's going to be a part of the ILET network. And the ILET community is something that we're going to be rolling out here very shortly. We even have a few spots left in our founding members program, which is an exclusive program for up to 200 people. We're capping it at 200, but you're going to have lifetime access to our platform, which means lifetime access to all of the training we do, direct one-on-ones with the experts that you see here on the panel and all of the other amazing instructors and speakers that we work with. And so if you want to check that out, you can go to ilet.network, click through to the community tab, and you can follow the prompts and get it that way. So that's really cool. And coming up later this year, you're going to see the 2022 ILET Summit coming up. And again, a lot of the folks you've seen here are going to be presenting and talking more in depth on their subject matters. And it's really going to be exciting to host them and to share more knowledge and experience with you and with the rest of the law enforcement industry. So thank you so much again for joining us here on the podcast. And I'm going to end it with showing the video, the promo video for the 2022 ILET Summit again. So we'll see you at the next roundtable. Stay safe.